Before we go anywhere at all, let's take a moment to settle. You don't need to sit up straight. You don't need to take notes. There won't be a test. The whole point of the next little while is that you can let your body get heavy, let your breathing slow down, and just let the words drift past without holding on to any of them. If you fall asleep somewhere in the middle, that means this is working. If you wake up later and only remember every third sentence, that also means this is working. So find the position you want to be in for a while. Loosen your jaw, unclench your hands. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. The room can be as dark as you like. The sound can be as low as you like. There is nowhere else you need to be, and there is nothing else you need to do right now. Before we drift into the subject itself, one small thing. This is a calm walk through a part of the human body, made for rest and for gentle learning. It isn't professional advice of any kind, medical or otherwise, so please don't lean on it for anything that matters. If you have a real concern about your own body, that's a conversation for a doctor in the daytime, not a sleepy voice in the dark. And please don't listen to this while you're driving or while you're doing anything that needs your attention. Find somewhere safe, somewhere you can stop moving for a while, somewhere you can let the world go soft at the edges. And if you'd like to come back to any of this while you're awake, there is a companion guide called the No Fluff Anatomy and Physiology Guide, and you can find it at the link in the description. It covers the same ground in a form you can actually read, with your eyes open and a cup of coffee nearby. But you don't need it tonight. Tonight, you can just listen. Tonight, the only job your brain has is to wander along beside these words, and even that job is optional. So let's start with a very simple thought. Your body is made of pieces. That's not a strange idea. A bicycle is made of pieces. A sandwich is made of pieces. A house is made of pieces. And the pieces of a house fit together in a certain order. You have bricks, and those bricks are arranged into walls, and those walls are arranged into rooms, and those rooms are arranged into a house. You can look at any one brick and say, this is a small part of the kitchen wall. You can look at the kitchen and say, this is one room inside the larger house. You can look at the house from the street and say, that whole shape is a place where people live. Same house, just different levels of zoom. Your body works the same way. The smallest living pieces are called cells. A cell is the tiniest unit of you that is still alive and still doing the work of being you. One cell is so small you can't see it with your naked eye, but it's there, and it's busy. It takes in food. It makes energy. It gets rid of waste. It responds to what's going on around it. That's already a lot to do for something so small. But a cell can't do everything on its own. If a house were just a loose pile of bricks sitting in a field, it wouldn't be a house at all. The bricks need to be arranged and held together and given a job to do together. Cells are the same. When a lot of cells that are similar to each other all gather together and do the same kind of work, we call that a tissue. A tissue is a group of similar cells working as a team. Think of it like a neighborhood made up of houses that all look alike. If you see one row of similar houses, and all of them have families inside, and all of them have little gardens, you start to think of that street as having its own character. That street is like a tissue. Many tiny units, all very similar, all contributing to the same general goal. And when different tissues come together and arrange themselves into a shape that has a particular job, we call that an organ. An organ is made of at least two kinds of tissue, usually more, and those tissues cooperate to do something specific. Your stomach is an organ, your heart is an organ, your brain is an organ. Each one is a collection of different tissues, each tissue doing its part, and all of it wrapped up into a shape with a name and a job. If a tissue is a street, then an organ is a whole neighborhood, with streets and houses and shops and a little park, all arranged so that people can live their lives there. And then, when several organs work together for a shared purpose, that's called a system. A system is the largest level we're going to talk about tonight. Your heart and your blood vessels work together as a system to move blood around. Your mouth and your stomach and your intestines work together as a system to take in food and pull out the useful parts. And all of your systems, sitting side by side and talking to each other, together make the whole house that is you. That idea, nesting one thing inside a bigger thing, is one of the most calming ideas in all of anatomy. A cell sits inside a tissue sits inside an organ sits inside a system sits inside a body. Nothing is floating around lost. Everything has a place, and everything is connected to everything else. Even the smallest, loneliest cell in the tip of your little toe is part of a tissue, part of an organ, part of a system, part of a whole. It belongs. It's doing its small job. And all you have to do right now is lie still and let it keep working. Let's sit with that for a moment, because this is the foundation for everything else. The human body isn't a bag of random parts. It's organized. It has layers. And the layers repeat, no matter which part of the body you're looking at. If you zoom in far enough on a muscle, you find muscle cells. If you zoom in far enough on a bone, you find bone cells. If you zoom in far enough on a nerve, you find nerve cells. The details change from place to place, but the pattern stays the same. Small units gather into groups. Groups gather into structures. Structures gather into working systems. It's a quiet, orderly kind of thing, and it happens without you ever having to think about it. And that's the other part worth noticing. All of this organization is happening right now, while you lie there, while your eyes get heavy, while your breathing slows. Your heart is beating. Your lungs are pulling air in and letting it out. Your stomach is slowly working on whatever you last ate. Your cells are making energy and cleaning up and responding to tiny chemical signals. It's all happening. It's been happening since before you woke up this morning, and it will keep happening after you fall asleep tonight. You don't have to manage any of it. You don't have to supervise your cells or remind your tissues to cooperate. The whole layered structure of you just keeps going, quietly, on its own. So tonight, we're going to take that idea and stretch it out very gently across the whole body. We'll start with the smallest layer, the cells, and we'll talk about what they have in common, no matter where they live. Then we'll look at the tissues, the teams of cells, and get to know the four main kinds. Then we'll move up to the organs, where tissues are arranged into shapes with names and jobs. And then we'll finish by walking through the systems, one by one, slowly, so you can hear how they fit together and how they rely on one another. That's the whole plan. It's not a race. It's more like a long, slow walk through a familiar house, turning on one gentle lamp at a time. And just so you know where we are in that walk, right now we are standing at the very front door. We haven't even opened it yet. We're just standing there, in the quiet, feeling the weight of our own body, and noticing that it's made of smaller things. That's enough for now. That's already a lot, actually, when you think about it. Every single one of us is a walking collection of trillions of tiny living units, all arranged into patterns, all working together, all taking care of the things that need taking care of. You are not one thing. You are a community. A quiet, organized, endlessly patient community. And that community has been holding you up all day, and it will hold you up all night too, and it doesn't need you to be awake for any of it. So let your attention settle back down. You don't have to keep track of the words. You don't have to remember what a tissue is, or what an organ does, or how many levels there are. If you remember nothing else from this whole experience, just remember this: you are built in layers, like the softest, most complicated house that has ever existed, and every layer is tucked inside the next one, safe and supported, and exactly where it's meant to be. Before we start looking more closely at cells, let's restate that idea one more time, because it's the thread that everything else will hang from. The smallest living part of you is the cell. A group of similar cells working together is a tissue. Different tissues working together make an organ. Different organs working together make a system, and all the systems together make you. Cell, tissue, organ, system, body. 5 little steps from the very small to the very whole. That's the map, that's the whole map. You already know the shape of it, and that's more than enough for tonight. Now let's lean a little closer to that first step, the cell, and take our time with it. Because the cell is where everything begins. Every tissue, every organ, every system, every thought you've ever had, and every breath you've ever taken started with cells doing what cells do. And the first thing to understand is that a cell is a living thing in its own right. It's not a dead brick. It's a tiny, active, busy little pocket of life. It eats, it breathes, it makes energy, it gets rid of waste, it grows, it responds to what's happening around it, and sometimes it divides, making two cells where there used to be one. All of that in a package so small that you could line up 100 of them across the width of a single hair. Every cell in your body is wrapped in a thin, flexible covering called a membrane. You can think of the membrane as the cell's skin, or even better, as its front door. The membrane decides what comes in and what goes out. It's not a solid wall, because the cell needs to take in food and oxygen and water, and it needs to let out waste and carbon dioxide and messages. So the membrane is more like a very careful doorman. It lets in the things the cell needs. It keeps out the things the cell doesn't need, and it lets out the things that need to leave. All day and all night, without complaining, every single one of your trillions of cells is gently managing its own front door. Inside the membrane, the cell is filled with a kind of watery fluid. This fluid is called cytoplasm. It's not empty space, it's more like a soft, thick soup, and floating in that soup are all the little working parts of the cell. There are parts that make energy, parts that build proteins, parts that break things down, parts that package things up and send them to where they're needed. Each of those parts has a job, and each one of them is also wrapped in its own little membrane. So even inside the cell, there are smaller rooms with smaller jobs. The layers never stop. And right in the middle of most of your cells, there's a little structure that holds the instructions. It's called the nucleus. The nucleus is the cell's library. Inside it are your genes, which are written in a long chemical language called DNA. The DNA contains the instructions for building and running every part of you. Every cell in your body has the same set of instructions, but not every cell reads every instruction. A cell in your eye reads the part about how to make eye proteins. A cell in your liver reads the part about how to do liver jobs. They all have the same book. They just open different pages. That's why cells can all start from the same basic plan, and yet end up looking and acting so differently. That's worth pausing on, because it's one of those ideas that feels too big for how small it is. Every one of your cells carries the whole story of how to build you. The same instructions that told your heart how to be a heart are also sitting in the cells of your skin and your bones and your tongue. And because those instructions are so long and so detailed, and because they're folded up so carefully inside the nucleus, they fit into a space that's too small to see. The whole set of instructions for a human body tucked into almost every single cell of that body. It's like carrying the complete blueprints for an entire house in every single brick. Cells don't all look the same, of course. A nerve cell is long and thin, designed to carry messages over distances. A muscle cell is stretchy, designed to shorten and pull. A skin cell is flat and tough, designed to make a barrier. A red blood cell is shaped like a little dented disc, designed to carry oxygen. But no matter what shape they are, no matter what job they do, they all share those basic features. A membrane, a fluid inside, working parts, and a set of instructions in the middle. That's the common ground. That's what makes a cell a cell. And cells don't just sit there in isolation. They touch the cells around them. They send chemical messages to their neighbors. They share nutrients and signals and waste products. And they cling to one another, forming sheets and tubes and bundles. That's how a tissue begins. A whole crowd of similar cells, each one doing its small private job, but also holding hands with the cells nearby, so that together they can do something bigger than any one of them could do alone. It's the same idea as a choir. One voice can carry a note, but many voices, standing close together and singing the same note, make a sound that fills a whole room. We'll get to the tissues properly in a little while, but for now, just let the cells settle in your mind as a friendly little image. A tiny room with a soft wall, full of gentle activity, with a library in the middle and a doorman at the edge. That's your smallest self. That's the brick the whole house is built from, and you have trillions of them, and every one of them is on your side. Now, one small thought to hold on to as you sink a little deeper. Cells are not static. They're not like bricks in a wall, just sitting there for years without changing. Most of the cells in your body are alive and active and constantly doing things. They take in material, they build things, they break things down, they respond to signals, they divide. Some of them live for only a few days. Some of them live for years. The cells that line your intestines are replaced every few days. The cells in your bones are slowly remodeled over years. Your skin is constantly making new cells and shedding old ones. There is a quiet, endless cycle of building and clearing away happening all through you, even now. You might have heard that the body replaces itself every 7 years, or something like that. That's not exactly true. Different cells have different lifespans, and some cells stay with you for your whole life. But the spirit of the idea is right. You are not a fixed, finished object. You are a flowing, ongoing process, a constant, gentle renewal. The pieces get swapped out, but the pattern stays the same. It's like a river that keeps the same name even though the water in it is always new. Or like a hotel where guests come and go, but the building remains. You are the pattern, not the pieces. And the pattern holds, night after night, while you sleep. That's enough of a foundation for now. We've gone from the whole body down to the single cell, and we've seen how the layers fit together. Cell, tissue, organ, system, body. A nested set of homes, each one inside the next. And all of it is happening right now, while you lie there and breathe, without you having to lift a finger. The smallest parts of you are already taking care of the largest parts of you, and they don't need any help from your waking mind. You can let that mind go blurry at the edges. The cells know what they're doing. They've known since before you were born. In a little while, we'll move up one level and spend some time with tissues, the first big team effort. We'll meet the 4 main types of tissue and get to know how each one works. But before we get there, let's just sit with the cell for a few more minutes. Let it be enough. A tiny living room with a soft edge, a watery middle, a library of instructions, and a quiet sense of purpose. That's what you're made of. That's what's holding you together right now, even as your eyelids get heavier and the words start to feel further away. There's no need to remember any of this. There's no need to keep the thread. The thread will be here, in the air, whenever you drift back toward it. And if you don't drift back, that's fine too. The whole architecture of you will keep working whether you're following along or not. That's the quiet truth at the center of this whole long walk. Your body is not waiting for you to understand it. It's not waiting for anything. It's just doing what it was built to do, in layers, from the smallest cells to the largest systems, while you rest. So rest there for a moment. Let the idea of the cell rise and fall in your mind like a slow breath. You are made of trillions of tiny living rooms, and each one of them is quietly keeping its lights on for you. And all you have to do is be still and breathe and let them work. The cells that line the inside of your mouth, the cells that make up the outer layer of your skin, the cells that cover the surface of your eye, the cells that line the inside of your lungs, the cells that line the inside of your blood vessels. All of these are made from flat, thin cells that pack together closely, like tiles on a floor, or bricks in a wall, or stones in a pavement. Their job is to cover surfaces, to line cavities, to form barriers between one part of the body and another. And that job is so important. Every moment of your life, your body is deciding what stays in and what stays out, what's allowed to pass through and what's turned away. And epithelial cells are the ones standing at the door. If you think about your skin, which is the largest epithelial surface you have, you can see the work it does. It keeps the inside in and the outside out. It keeps water inside your body, which is good because you dry out very fast without it. It keeps germs outside your body, which is also good because the outside world is full of tiny living things that would love to find a warm, wet place to settle. The outer layer of your skin is actually made of epithelial cells that are packed so tightly together that almost nothing can slip between them. They're like the tiles on a roof, overlapping just enough to keep the rain out, and they're constantly being replaced from below, new cells pushing up as old cells flake away. You lose millions of skin cells every day, and your body just makes more. You leave a little trail of yourself on your pillow, on your sheets, in the air around you. And it doesn't matter, because there are always more where those came from. Inside your body, epithelial tissue does the same kind of work, but in a softer, wetter way. The lining of your stomach is epithelial tissue. The lining of your intestines is epithelial tissue. The lining of your lungs is epithelial tissue. These are all places where the body needs to control what passes through. In your lungs, oxygen needs to pass from the air into your blood, and carbon dioxide needs to pass from your blood back into the air. The epithelial cells there are so thin that these gases can slip right through them, but the cells still form a barrier that keeps everything else in its place. In your stomach, the epithelial lining lets certain things pass through, like water and some nutrients, but it also protects the deeper layers from the strong acid your stomach uses to break down food. The same cells that look soft and delicate are also tough enough to hold back acid. That's the quiet cleverness of epithelial tissue. It looks simple, but it's doing constant, careful work. The second major type of tissue is called connective tissue, and if epithelial tissue is the body's tiles and coverings, connective tissue is the body's glue and scaffolding. It's the stuff that holds other things together. It's the packing material, the support beams, the ropes and cables and cushions. Connective tissue is a little different from the other tissue types because it's not mostly made of cells packed tightly together. It's made of cells spread out within a large amount of material that the cells themselves produce. That material is called the matrix, and the matrix can be very different depending on where you are in the body. Sometimes the matrix is soft and runny, sometimes it's firm and rubbery, sometimes it's hard and solid. The cells are like people living in a big house, and the matrix is the house itself, built by those very same people. Blood is a type of connective tissue, which feels surprising at first, because blood is a liquid and doesn't seem like a tissue at all. But blood has cells, and those cells are carried in a liquid matrix called plasma. The cells in your blood do all sorts of jobs. Red blood cells carry oxygen. White blood cells help defend against invaders. Platelets help the blood to clot when there's a cut. All of these cells float in the plasma, which is mostly water but also carries salts, sugars, proteins, hormones, and waste products. So blood is a connective tissue with a fluid matrix. It connects the whole body by flowing through it, delivering things to the cells and picking things up from the cells. Every single cell in your body is within a short distance of a blood vessel, because blood is the highway that keeps everyone supplied. Bone is another type of connective tissue, but its matrix is hard. The cells inside bone are called osteocytes, and they live in little spaces within a solid material made mostly of calcium and phosphorus. That hard matrix is what gives bone its strength and its ability to support your whole body. Without bone, you'd be a puddle on the floor. With bone, you can stand up, walk, sit, lie down, roll over, all of it supported by a living mineral framework. And bone isn't dead rock, even though it feels that way. Bone is alive. It has cells inside it. It has blood vessels running through it. It's constantly being remodeled, built up, and broken down and rebuilt, especially when you're young and growing, but even in adulthood. If you break a bone, the cells inside the bone wake up and start building new material to mend it. That's why a cast works. The bone heals itself. The cast just holds everything still, so the cells can do their slow, patient work. Cartilage is connective tissue too, and its matrix is somewhere between soft and hard. It's firm but flexible, like a rubbery cushion. You have cartilage in your ears, in the tip of your nose, in the joints where bones meet, and in the rings around your windpipe that keep it open. Cartilage doesn't have as many blood vessels as bone, so it heals slowly if it's damaged, but it's very good at what it does. It cushions, it smooths, it lets joints move without grinding. In your knees, the ends of the bones are covered with a layer of cartilage that lets them glide over each other. In your ears, cartilage gives shape without being stiff. In your windpipe, cartilage holds the airway open so that breath can flow in and out all night long. Tendons and ligaments are also connective tissue, made of a tough, fibrous material that's strong in one direction, like a rope. Tendons connect muscle to bone. Ligaments connect bone to bone. They're made of closely packed fibers that can withstand a lot of pulling force, but they don't stretch much, and they don't have a big blood supply, so they can be slow to heal if they're damaged. But they're essential to movement. Every time you move your arm or your leg, muscles pull on tendons, and tendons pull on bones, and the bones move at the joints. Ligaments hold the joints together, making sure the bones don't slip out of place. So in a single movement of your finger, there's bone, cartilage, ligament, tendon, and muscle, all of it connective tissue doing its job. The third type of tissue is muscle tissue. Muscle tissue is built to contract. It shortens and pulls. That's its whole purpose. And there are 3 kinds of muscle in your body, each with a slightly different job. The first kind is skeletal muscle, which is attached to your bones and moves your body around. When you roll over in bed, you're using skeletal muscle. When you breathe in, the diaphragm, which is a dome-shaped muscle under your ribs, contracts and pulls air into your lungs. Skeletal muscle is called voluntary muscle because you can decide to move it. You can decide to lift your arm, or wiggle your toes, or roll onto your side. Not all skeletal muscle movement is voluntary all the time, of course. You don't have to think about every breath, and your posture muscles are working without your attention, but the big movements are under your conscious control. The second kind of muscle is smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is found in the walls of hollow organs. Your stomach has smooth muscle in its walls. Your intestines have smooth muscle in their walls. Your blood vessels have smooth muscle in their walls. Your bladder has smooth muscle in its walls. And smooth muscle is not under your voluntary control. You can't decide to squeeze your stomach or relax your blood vessels by thinking about it. Smooth muscle moves on its own, controlled by the nervous system and by chemical signals, and it works in slow, rhythmic waves. When food moves through your intestines, it's smooth muscle doing the pushing, squeezing in a coordinated pattern that carries the food along. When your blood vessels need to widen or narrow, smooth muscle in the walls responds, adjusting blood flow to different parts of the body. This is happening right now as you rest. Smooth muscle in your digestive system is still working through the last meal you ate. Smooth muscle in your blood vessels is gently adjusting to keep your blood pressure steady. You don't have to think about any of it, and that's exactly the way it should be. The third kind of muscle is cardiac muscle, and you only have it in one place, your heart. Cardiac muscle is built for endurance. It contracts and relaxes over and over again, every second of every minute of every day, from before you were born until the moment you die. It never gets a break, and it doesn't want one. Cardiac muscle is a special type of tissue that has its own rhythm. Even if all the nerves to your heart were disconnected, the heart would still beat, because the muscle cells themselves can generate their own electrical signal and pass it from one cell to the next. The heart is a community of muscle cells that are all connected to each other, and when one of them fires, the signal spreads, and the whole heart contracts in a smooth, coordinated squeeze. That's what you feel when you put your hand on your chest. That's the sound you hear when you're lying very still in a quiet room. It's cardiac muscle, doing its patient, rhythmic work. It's been doing that work since you were a tiny cluster of cells in the dark, and it will keep doing it all through tonight, and all through tomorrow, and for years and years to come. And then there's the fourth type of tissue, the one we'll spend the most time with in these talks, and that's nervous tissue. Nervous tissue is built to carry messages. It's made of cells called neurons and supporting cells called glial cells. Neurons are the communicators. They send electrical signals from one part of the body to another, fast, sometimes very fast, and they do this by being long and thin, with branches at either end. A neuron can be as short as a fraction of a millimeter, or it can be as long as your whole arm. It sends signals from your brain down your spinal cord to your muscles. It sends signals from your skin back up to your spinal cord and your brain. It receives information from the outside world. It coordinates thought and movement and sensation and memory and emotion. Every single thing you experience, from the warmth of your blanket to the weight of your eyelids, is being carried by nervous tissue. Glial cells are the helpers. They don't send electrical signals themselves, but they support the neurons in all sorts of ways. Some of them wrap around the neuron's long fiber and insulate it, making signals travel faster. Some of them provide nutrients. Some of them clean up waste. Some of them defend against infection. For a long time, we thought glial cells were just support workers, but now we know they do much more. They help shape the connections between neurons. They influence how signals are sent. They may even play a role in learning and memory. In some ways, the glial cells are like the caretakers of the nervous system, keeping everything tidy, well-fed, and working smoothly. So there you have the 4 basic tissue types: epithelial tissue for covering and lining, connective tissue for supporting and connecting, muscle tissue for moving and squeezing, nervous tissue for sending and receiving messages. Every organ in your body is made of some combination of these 4 tissues. Your stomach has an epithelial lining on the inside, connective tissue holding it in place, smooth muscle in its walls for churning, and nervous tissue carrying signals to and from it. Your heart has cardiac muscle in its walls, epithelial cells lining its chambers, connective tissue shaping its valves, and nervous tissue regulating its rhythm. Your skin is mostly epithelial tissue on the outside, with connective tissue underneath giving it strength and elasticity, smooth muscle in tiny amounts around hair follicles, and nervous tissue everywhere, sensing pressure and temperature and pain. Every organ is a blend. Every organ is a neighborhood made of different streets, different houses, different shops and parks, all arranged around a shared purpose. This is the part of the story where the body stops being a collection of parts and starts being a community. The tissues aren't isolated. They meet each other. They touch each other. They communicate. The epithelial cells on the inside of your blood vessels sit right on top of a layer of connective tissue, and both of them sit near smooth muscle, and all of them are dotted with nerve endings. In any given square millimeter of your body, there are several different tissues working side by side, each doing its own thing, each helping the others. That's why the body is so resilient. If one tissue is injured, the others can support it. If one tissue is weakened, the others can compensate. The body is not a single fragile thing. It's a network of overlapping, mutually supporting systems, and the tissues are the first layer of that network. And because we're easing into the nervous system, it's worth noting that nervous tissue is woven through every other tissue in the body. There's almost no part of you that isn't touched by a nerve ending, or a glial cell, or a tiny branch of a neuron. Your bones have nerve endings. Your blood vessels have nerve endings. Your skin is full of them. Your muscles are full of them. The nervous system is everywhere, in the same way that a city's telephone wires and internet cables are everywhere. It connects the whole community. It lets one neighborhood talk to another. It lets the whole body know what's happening, everywhere, all at once. And we haven't even started on the brain yet. We haven't talked about the spinal cord, or the nerves, or the sense organs. We're still just at the tissue level, and already you can see the shape of it. Already you can see how the body fits together, layer by layer, from the smallest cell to the largest system. And if you're still awake, or half awake, drifting somewhere between the words and the dark, then you're exactly where you're supposed to be. The body doesn't need your attention right now. Your tissues are doing fine without you. Your epithelial cells are still covering and lining. Your connective tissue is still holding and supporting. Your muscle tissue is still resting and ready. Your nervous tissue is still carrying the sound of these words from your ears to your brain, even if you're not listening anymore. That's the quiet beauty of the whole arrangement. It works. It just keeps working. And you can let yourself sink a little deeper into the pillow, a little further into the warm dark, because every layer of you is being held by the next layer, and none of it is asking anything of you. So let's close this section with a kind of soft map, the same one we started with, but seen from the middle instead of the beginning. If you could zoom in on your own body, you'd see systems made of organs, organs made of tissues, tissues made of cells. And if you could zoom out again, you'd see the whole shape of you, resting there, breathing, alive, completely whole. Every layer is necessary, every layer is doing its part. And the layer we've just been walking through, the tissue layer, is the one where the cells start to become something bigger than themselves. It's where the bricks become walls. It's where the individual voices become a choir. It's where the quiet work of being a body really begins. And it's there, in that soft middle layer, that the nervous system first appears. Not as a brain, not yet, but as a faint web of excitable cells, cells that have learned to send a signal, cells that have learned to respond. The first nervous systems, in the first simple animals, were just loose networks of these cells, touching each other, passing tiny chemical and electrical messages. Nothing like a brain, nothing like thought, just a web of communication, spread through the whole body, letting one part know what another part was doing. And somewhere in that ancient, simple web is the beginning of everything we'll talk about in the next section. The beginning of sensation, the beginning of response. The beginning of the long, slow road that leads from a single nerve cell to the thing behind your eyes that's hearing these words right now. But that's a road for later. Right now, the only road is the one you're already on, and it's soft, and it's dark, and it doesn't lead anywhere urgent. You can stop here for tonight. You can let the tissues settle into your mind, and then let them go. You don't need to remember the 4 types, or the names, or the difference between a tendon and a ligament. The body doesn't care whether you know its names. It only cares that you rest. And the nervous tissue, the quiet web of messengers, is already carrying that message through you. Rest, rest, rest. The nervous system is, in its simplest form, a system for carrying messages. That's what it is before it's anything else. It's not just the brain. It's not just the spinal cord. It's the whole network of tissues and cells that lets one part of the body know what another part of the body is doing, and lets the whole body respond to the world around it. And the strange and wonderful thing about the nervous system is that it's built for speed. Other systems in the body work in slow, steady ways. The digestive system takes hours to do its work. The endocrine system sends chemical messages that travel through the blood and can take minutes or even days to have their full effect. But the nervous system works in fractions of a second. It's the body's rapid response system. It's the part of you that can notice a drop in temperature before you've even fully realized you're cold. It's the part of you that pulls your hand back from something hot before you've even decided to move. That speed is possible because the nervous system uses electricity and chemistry together in a way that lets a signal travel from your fingertip to your spinal cord and back again in the time it takes to blink. And the nervous system is made of only 2 broad kinds of cells, which we've already met once. The first kind is the neuron. The neuron is the messenger. It's the cell that carries the actual signal. The second kind is the glial cell, or glia, and glia means glue. Glial cells are the support cells. They feed the neurons, they insulate the neurons, they clean up after the neurons, they guide the neurons during development, and they help the neurons do their work. For a long time, the story we told about the nervous system was mostly a story about neurons, and the glia were treated like the background. But the more we look, the more we see that glia are doing an enormous amount of quiet, essential work. They're not just holding the neurons in place. They're part of the conversation. Some kinds of glia can even influence the strength of the signals that neurons send. So when we talk about the nervous system, we're talking about a partnership. The neurons carry the messages, and the glia keep the lines clear and the lights on. Let's spend a little while with the neuron first, because it's the cell that gives the nervous system its character. A neuron is built to send and receive information. To do that, it has a shape that's unlike any other cell in the body. Most cells are more or less roundish or flat or squarish. A neuron is long. It has a cell body, which is where the nucleus and most of the usual cell machinery live. And then it has long, thin extensions coming out of that cell body. These extensions are called processes, and there are two main kinds. One kind is called dendrites. Dendrites are the receiving parts of the neuron. They branch out like the roots of a tree, spreading into the surrounding tissue, and they pick up signals from other neurons, or from sensory cells, or from the environment. The word dendrite comes from a Greek word for tree, and that's exactly what they look like. A bare tree in winter, reaching out in every direction. The other kind of process is called an axon. Most neurons have one axon, and it's usually much longer than the dendrites. The axon is the sending part of the neuron. It carries signals away from the cell body and toward other neurons, or toward muscles, or toward glands. Some axons are very short, reaching only to a neighboring cell. Some axons are very long. The axon of a neuron that runs from your lower back down to your big toe can be more than a meter long. One single cell stretching from your spine to your toe, carrying electrical messages the whole way. That's not a wire in a machine. That's a living cell, with a membrane and a nucleus and cytoplasm, just like any other cell, but stretched out into a thin, delicate line that runs through your whole leg. And that line is doing its work right now, even as you lie still. Tiny signals are traveling up and down it, keeping your brain informed about the position of your foot, the temperature of your skin, the pressure of the blanket on your toes. It never stops. The end of the axon branches out into little swellings called terminal boutons, or axon terminals, or synaptic boutons, and these are the places where the neuron talks to the next cell in line. That next cell might be another neuron, or a muscle cell, or a gland cell. The point where the axon terminal meets the next cell is called a synapse, and the synapse is one of the most important places in the whole body. It's where the message gets passed from one cell to the next. When the electrical signal reaches the end of the axon, it triggers the release of a chemical messenger called a neurotransmitter. The neurotransmitter drifts across the tiny gap between the two cells, and it lands on the receiving cell, and the receiving cell responds. Sometimes the response is to send its own signal further along. Sometimes the response is to stay quiet. Sometimes the response is to contract, if the receiving cell is a muscle fiber. Sometimes the response is to release a hormone, if the receiving cell is a gland. But the basic idea is always the same. Electricity travels down the neuron. Chemistry carries the signal across the gap. Electricity picks up again on the other side. Electricity, chemistry, electricity. That's the rhythm of the nervous system. That's how a thought becomes a movement. That's how a sensation becomes a perception. That's how a sound in the dark becomes a word in your mind. And the electrical part of that process is worth understanding, because it's one of the most beautiful pieces of biology there is. A neuron, like every cell, has a membrane around it, and that membrane keeps the inside of the cell a little different from the outside. There are more sodium ions outside the cell than inside, and more potassium ions inside the cell than outside. Ions are just atoms or molecules with an electric charge, and because there are more positive ions in one place and fewer in another, there's a tiny voltage across the membrane. When the neuron is resting, that voltage is called the resting membrane potential. It's not a lot of voltage. It's about 70 millivolts, negative on the inside relative to the outside. But that tiny difference is a kind of stored energy. It's like a battery that's been charged and is waiting to be used. When a neuron receives a strong enough signal from its dendrites, little gates in the membrane open up, and sodium ions rush in. This makes the inside of the cell less negative. If the signal is strong enough to push the voltage past a certain threshold, then the gates open all along the membrane, and there's a sudden, rapid rush of sodium into the cell. That's called an action potential. It's the electrical impulse. It travels down the axon like a wave, not by moving the ions themselves very far, but by opening gates in sequence, one after another, all the way along the length of the cell. It's like a crowd doing the wave in a stadium. Each person stays in place, but the wave travels around the whole arena. The action potential is the same idea, but with ions and gates instead of people and hands. After the sodium rushes in, potassium rushes out, and the membrane returns to its resting state, ready to fire again. All of this happens in a few milliseconds. And then the neuron rests for a moment, resets itself, and waits for the next signal. If that sounds complicated, it is. But it's also something your body does trillions of times every second without any effort at all. Every time you hear a sound, every time you feel the sheets against your skin, every time your heart beats, every time you breathe, millions of action potentials are racing through your nerves, carrying information from one place to another. Right now, as these words reach your ears, your auditory nerve is firing in patterns that your brain is turning into language. And if you're too sleepy to follow the meaning anymore, the sound is still arriving, and the nerve is still firing, and the brain is still receiving. It never asks for a break. It never complains. It just carries and carries and carries, all night long. Not all neurons are the same, of course. There are different kinds, arranged in different ways, doing different jobs. But the basic design is always the same. Dendrites receive, cell body integrates, axon sends, synapse passes the message on. Some neurons have so many dendrites that they receive signals from thousands of other neurons at once. Some neurons have very simple shapes and only talk to one or two neighbors, but the pattern holds. Information comes in through the dendrites. It's weighed and sorted in the cell body. If it's strong enough, an action potential fires down the axon, and when it reaches the end of the axon, a chemical is released, and the message moves on. That's the whole unit of nervous function, repeated over and over and over again. And from that simple repeating unit, everything else is built. Memory, movement, sensation, emotion, thought. All of it comes from neurons doing this one basic thing. Now, the other half of the nervous system is the glia, and they deserve their own gentle introduction. Glial cells come in several varieties, and they do many things. One kind, called an oligodendrocyte, is found in the brain and spinal cord, and it wraps around axons like a blanket. The wrapping is called myelin, and myelin is very important. It's made mostly of fat, and it acts like insulation around the axon. It makes the action potential travel much faster. Instead of the signal moving smoothly along the whole length of the axon, it jumps from one gap in the myelin to the next, and that jumping is very quick. An axon with myelin can carry a signal at 100 meters per second or more. An axon without myelin carries it much more slowly. That's why some of your fastest responses, like pulling your hand away from something sharp, depend on myelinated axons. The insulation lets the message arrive in time to make a difference. Another kind of glial cell is called a Schwann cell, and it does the same job in the nerves outside the brain and spinal cord. Schwann cells wrap around peripheral axons, forming the myelin sheath in the arms and legs and torso. When a peripheral nerve is damaged, the Schwann cells help clear the debris and form a path for the axon to regrow. Nerves outside the brain and spinal cord can sometimes heal much better than nerves inside the brain and spinal cord, partly because of the support the Schwann cells provide. The brain and spinal cord have their own glial support, of course, but they're not as good at repairing large injuries. That's one of the reasons injuries to the spinal cord can be so serious. The neurons there have less help regrowing once they're cut. There are also microglia, which are the immune cells of the brain and spinal cord. They move around and look for signs of damage or infection. When they find something wrong, they respond. They can change shape and engulf debris. they can release chemical signals that call for help. They're like a small, vigilant maintenance crew, always patrolling, always checking, always ready to respond. The brain is protected by a blood-brain barrier, which keeps most things out, but the brain still needs its own defenses, and microglia are part of that. They're always on watch, even while you sleep. Especially while you sleep, in fact, because sleep is when the brain does a lot of its cleaning. Astrocytes are the most numerous glial cells in the brain, and they do an enormous variety of jobs. Their shape is star-like, with many branches reaching out. Some of those branches touch blood vessels, and some of them touch neurons, and that puts astrocytes in a perfect position to help manage the environment around the neurons. They help regulate blood flow to active areas. They take up extra neurotransmitters from the synapse, so the signal can stop cleanly. They help maintain the right balance of ions in the fluid around the neurons. They help form the blood-brain barrier. They provide nutrients. They respond to injury. They guide developing neurons during growth. They may even play a role in learning and memory by influencing how strong the connections between neurons become. So when we talk about the nervous system, we should remember that for every neuron sending a signal, there are glial cells standing by, keeping the environment safe and stable and ready for the next signal. It's a collaboration. It's not just the wires. It's also the people who maintain the wires, and the insulation around the wires, and the building that houses the wires, and the security that protects the wires. Now here's the part where this all starts to fit together. When you have a lot of neurons and glial cells arranged in a particular way, you get nervous tissue, and nervous tissue can be organized into larger structures. In the brain and spinal cord, there are regions where the cell bodies of many neurons are gathered together. These regions look grayish in preserved tissue, which is why they're called gray matter. The gray matter is where a lot of the processing happens. It's where the cell bodies and dendrites receive signals and make decisions. Then there are regions where the myelinated axons are bundled together. These regions look paler because myelin is mostly fat, and in preserved tissue, it has a whitish appearance. That's why these regions are called white matter. The white matter is the cabling. It's the long-distance communication lines that carry signals from one area to another. Every single thought, every sensation, every movement involves both gray matter and white matter working together. The gray matter does the work of integrating and deciding. The white matter does the work of carrying the information from place to place. And then, if we zoom out again, we find the larger structures of the nervous system. There's the brain, which is the great center of integration, the place where sensory information is turned into experience, and where plans and memories and emotions and language and everything else take shape. There's the spinal cord, which is the main cable running from the brain down through the spine, carrying messages both ways. And there are the nerves, which branch out from the brain and spinal cord into every part of the body. The nerves are bundles of axons, some carrying information toward the central nervous system, and some carrying information away from it. Some of those nerves are dedicated to sensation, carrying touch, pain, temperature, pressure, and position sense. Some of those nerves are dedicated to movement, carrying commands to the muscles. Some of those nerves carry both, and some of those nerves belong to the autonomic nervous system, the part that runs the internal organs without your awareness. But that's its own whole subject, and we'll come to it later. For now, let's hold on to the simplest version of the map. The nervous system has two big divisions. One is the central nervous system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. The other is the peripheral nervous system, which is all the nerves outside the brain and spinal cord. The central nervous system is the processing center. The peripheral nervous system is the wiring that connects the center to everything else. Sensory nerves bring information in. Motor nerves carry commands out. And in between, the central nervous system takes it all in, weighs it all, and decides what to do. Most of the time, the decisions are so fast and so automatic that you never notice them. Most of the time, the system runs in the background, like the heating and cooling in a house, adjusting, responding, keeping everything within its safe range. That's the quiet secret of the nervous system. It's not just the seat of thought. It's also the body's great regulator. It's the reason you don't have to think about your heart rate, or your blood pressure, or your digestion, or the size of your pupils, or the temperature of your skin. All of that is being monitored and adjusted, constantly, by the nervous system, with no help from you at all. And this is the thing I want you to carry into the next part, the part where we start looking at the brain itself. The nervous system is not an optional extra bolted onto the body. It's not a gadget that sits on top of the body and drives it around. It's woven through everything. It's in every tissue, every organ, every square millimeter of skin. It's the system that makes the body more than a collection of parts. It's the system that lets the whole organism act as one coordinated whole. When you breathe in, the nervous system is doing that. When your stomach gently churns, the nervous system is doing that. When your eyelids drift closed and your breathing slows and your muscles soften, the nervous system is doing that. It's the system of connection. It's the body's quiet web of communication, and it's been awake since the day you were born, and it will be awake all night, watching over you, carrying the soft signals of rest from one part of you to another. You can let it work. You can let it carry you. That's what it's for. Now we can begin to talk about the central nervous system itself, the brain and the spinal cord. And the first thing to understand is that these two structures are not really separate from each other. They're one continuous piece of nervous tissue. The brain sits at the top, protected inside the skull, and the spinal cord extends down from the brain, through the hole at the bottom of the skull, and runs down inside the bony tunnel made by the vertebrae of the spine. If you could lift them out carefully, still connected, you'd see that the brain narrows down into the brainstem, and the brainstem narrows down into the spinal cord, and the whole thing looks like a long, soft, pale structure, a bit like a mushroom with a very long stem. There's no sharp dividing line. The brain blends into the cord. They are one system, one continuous organ, wrapped in protective coverings and bathed in fluid. That fluid is worth mentioning early, because it's part of what keeps the brain and spinal cord safe. The central nervous system floats in a clear liquid called cerebrospinal fluid. This fluid is produced deep inside the brain, in chambers called ventricles, and it circulates around the outside of the brain and down around the spinal cord. It does several jobs at once. It cushions the brain so that when you move your head, the brain doesn't knock against the inside of the skull. It provides buoyancy, so the brain doesn't have to support its full weight. It carries nutrients and removes waste. And it helps maintain a stable chemical environment for the neurons inside. The brain is suspended in this fluid, floating gently, the way a soft object floats in water. That's why your brain can be so delicate and yet survive all the small movements and bumps of everyday life. Every time you walk, every time you turn your head, every time you roll over in bed, your brain sways very slightly in its fluid cushion, and the fluid absorbs the movement, and the neurons go on with their work. The brain and spinal cord are also wrapped in 3 layers of protective tissue called the meninges. The outermost layer is thick and tough, and it lines the inside of the skull and the inside of the spinal canal. The middle layer is delicate and web-like. The innermost layer is very thin and clings closely to the surface of the brain and cord. These layers help hold the cerebrospinal fluid in place and provide another level of protection. Between the layers there are spaces where the fluid flows. It's a careful piece of packaging. The central nervous system, which is the most fragile and the most important tissue in the body, is wrapped in bone, wrapped in membranes, and suspended in fluid. Everything about it is designed to keep it safe from the bumps and jolts of the outside world. And that's fitting, because the central nervous system can't easily repair itself the way skin or bone can. It's built to be protected, not to be repaired. Let's begin with the spinal cord, because it's simpler in structure and easier to understand before we climb up into the brain. The spinal cord is a long column of nervous tissue that runs from the base of the skull down to about the level of the first or second lumbar vertebra, which is a little below the ribs, in the lower back. It doesn't run all the way to the bottom of the spine. It ends partway down, and from that point downward, The spinal canal contains a bundle of nerve roots that fan out like a horse's tail, which is why that bundle has a Latin name that means horse's tail. The spinal cord itself is about as thick as your finger, but it carries an enormous amount of traffic. Every message that goes from your brain to your body, and every message that goes from your body to your brain, passes through the spinal cord. If you cut across the spinal cord and look at it in cross-section, you see a pattern that looks a little like a butterfly or a letter H. In the center is a small canal filled with cerebrospinal fluid. Around the canal is a region of gray matter, shaped like that butterfly. The gray matter contains the cell bodies of neurons, and it's where a lot of the local processing happens. The two upper wings of the butterfly are called the dorsal horns, and the two lower wings are called the ventral horns. The dorsal horns receive sensory information coming in from the body. The ventral horns contain the cell bodies of motor neurons that send commands out to the muscles. So there's a simple division already. Sensory in through the back, motor out through the front. You can remember it by thinking of a person walking. The back of the body is where sensation from the outside world arrives. The front of the body is where movement goes out to meet the world. Dorsal is toward the back. Ventral is toward the front. Sensory in the dorsal horn. Motor in the ventral horn. It's one of those quiet symmetries that runs all through the nervous system. Around the gray matter of the spinal cord is the white matter, made of myelinated axons. This is the cabling. The white matter is arranged in columns that run up and down the length of the cord. Some of these axons carry sensory information up to the brain. Some of them carry motor commands down from the brain. Some of them connect different levels of the spinal cord to each other so that the neck can coordinate with the lower back and the arms can coordinate with the legs. At every level of the spine, from the top of the neck to the bottom of the back, pairs of spinal nerves branch off and go out to the body. There are 31 pairs of spinal nerves in total. They emerge from the cord, pass through small gaps between the vertebrae, and then travel out to the skin, the muscles, the joints, and the internal organs. Each pair of nerves serves a particular region of the body. The nerves from the neck serve the shoulders and arms. The nerves from the lower back serve the hips and legs. The nerves from the chest serve the trunk. It's a segmented arrangement, like the branches of a tree coming off the trunk at regular intervals, and each branch carries both sensory and motor fibers. The spinal cord does more than just pass messages up and down. It also handles many reflexes on its own, without involving the brain at all. A reflex is a fast, automatic response to a stimulus. The classic example is the knee-jerk reflex, the one the doctor tests by tapping just below your kneecap with a little rubber hammer. When the hammer taps the tendon, it stretches the muscle in the front of your thigh. Sensory receptors in the muscle detect the stretch and send a signal into the spinal cord through a sensory nerve. Inside the spinal cord, that sensory nerve connects directly, or almost directly, to a motor neuron that goes back to the same muscle. The motor neuron fires, the muscle contracts, and your leg kicks forward a little. All of this happens in a fraction of a second, and the brain isn't involved at all. The signal doesn't even have time to reach the brain before the movement has already happened. That's why you can't stop a knee-jerk reflex by trying. It's handled at the level of the spinal cord, and by the time you're aware of it, it's already over. There are many reflexes like this. If you touch something hot, the withdrawal reflex pulls your hand away before you've consciously registered the heat. If something touches your eye, you blink. If you step on something sharp, the leg flexes and the other leg stiffens to keep you balanced. Some reflexes are built into the wiring of the spinal cord from birth. Others are learned over time, but the fast, automatic ones are the spinal cord's own work. The brain might be informed after the fact, but the response itself happens locally. That's one of the great advantages of having a nervous system that's arranged in levels. The lower levels can handle the urgent, simple jobs on their own, while the higher levels stay free for the slower, more complex work of thinking and deciding and remembering. It's like having a very competent assistant who handles all the small emergencies without bothering you, and only comes to you when there's something big to deal with. Now let's climb up into the brain itself. The brain is the most complex structure we know of anywhere in the universe, and yet it starts out as a simple tube. In the early embryo, the whole central nervous system begins as a hollow tube of cells. The front end of that tube expands and folds and develops into the brain, and the back end remains as the spinal cord. The tube shape is never completely lost. The brain keeps a system of hollow chambers inside it, the ventricles, which are the remnants of that original tube, and they still hold cerebrospinal fluid. So even the most complicated structure in the known world is built around a simple, ancient shape, a tube, folded and expanded, but still a tube. At the base of the brain, just above where the spinal cord enters the skull, there's a region called the brainstem. The brainstem is the most ancient part of the brain, and it's responsible for the most essential functions of life. It's made of 3 parts, stacked on top of each other like the sections of a tower. The lowest part, which connects directly to the spinal cord, is the medulla oblongata, or just the medulla. The medulla controls breathing, heart rate, blood pressure, swallowing, vomiting, and other basic vital functions. If the medulla is damaged, life itself is threatened, because the automatic drive to breathe and to keep the heart beating comes from there. The medulla is the part of the brain that keeps you alive when you're not thinking about being alive. It's the part that keeps your breathing going all night, keeps your heart steady, keeps your blood pressure within its safe range. It never sleeps. It doesn't need to. It just keeps on doing its quiet, essential work, minute after minute, year after year. Above the medulla is the pons. The pons is a bulge of tissue that acts as a bridge between different parts of the brain. It helps relay signals between the medulla, the cerebellum, and the higher brain. It also plays a role in sleep, in dreaming, in facial sensation and movement, in hearing, in balance, and in the coordination of breathing. The pons is a kind of junction box. It's a place where many different lines come together and are sorted and passed along. Above the pons is the midbrain, which is the smallest of the 3 brainstem sections. The midbrain handles things like visual and auditory reflexes. If a sudden sound makes you turn your head, the midbrain is involved. If a bright light makes your pupils shrink, the midbrain is involved. It also helps coordinate eye movements and body movements, and it contains a lot of the wiring for the motor system. The midbrain, pons, and medulla together are sometimes called the brainstem, and together they manage the background work of being alive. They're the oldest part of the brain in evolutionary terms, the part we share with reptiles and fish and every other creature with a backbone, and they work all the time without any conscious input from you. Just behind the brainstem, at the back of the skull, is the cerebellum. The word cerebellum means little brain, and that's exactly what it looks like. It's a wrinkled, rounded structure tucked under the back of the cerebrum, and it's packed with neurons. In fact, the cerebellum contains more neurons than the rest of the brain combined, even though it's much smaller in size. The cerebellum is best known for coordinating movement. It doesn't start movements, but it smooths them. It compares what you intended to do with what your body is actually doing, and it makes tiny adjustments, moment by moment, so that the movement is fluid and accurate. When you reach for a glass of water, the motor cortex in the cerebrum sends the command to move your arm, but the cerebellum is the one making sure your hand doesn't overshoot the glass or wobble on the way there. When you walk, the cerebellum is adjusting your balance with every step. When you speak, the cerebellum is coordinating the muscles of your mouth and tongue. When you lie in bed and roll over, the cerebellum is smoothing that movement too, keeping it easy and fluid so that you barely wake up as you turn. But the cerebellum does more than movement. We're learning that it also plays a role in attention, in language, in emotional regulation, and in some kinds of memory. It's connected to many parts of the brain, not just the motor areas. And because it's so densely packed with neurons, it may be doing a great deal of quiet processing that we don't fully understand yet. What we do know is that the cerebellum is a master of precision. It works in the background, making fine adjustments, so that everything you do feels smooth and effortless. And right now, even as you lie there half asleep, your cerebellum is keeping your body still enough to rest, adjusting the tiny muscles in your neck and back so that your head doesn't loll uncomfortably, making the tiny adjustments to your breathing and your swallowing and your eye movements that keep you comfortable. It's the body's great quiet tuner, always listening, always adjusting, never making a fuss. Above the brainstem and the cerebellum is the largest and most recognizable part of the brain, the cerebrum. The cerebrum is the part that fills the top of the skull, with its deeply wrinkled surface and its division into left and right halves. The two halves are called the cerebral hemispheres, and they're connected by a thick band of nerve fibers called the corpus callosum, which lets the left and right sides share information. The surface of the cerebrum is covered by a thin layer of gray matter called the cerebral cortex. The word cortex means bark, and that's a good image. The cortex is the outer layer, a few millimeters thick, but it's folded and wrinkled in a way that packs an enormous amount of surface area into the limited space of the skull. If you unfolded the cortex and spread it out flat, it would be about the size of a large dinner napkin. All those folds are the brain's way of fitting more processing power into the same space. The grooves and ridges you see in pictures of the brain are the creases in that folded sheet. The ridges are called gyrae, and the grooves are called sulci. They look chaotic at first, but they're actually quite consistent from one person to another. The pattern of folds is one of the things that makes your brain recognizably human and recognizably yours. The cortex is where the highest levels of processing happen. It's where sensory information becomes conscious experience. It's where decisions are made, where words are formed, where plans are laid, where memories are stored and retrieved, where faces are recognized, where music is heard, where the shape of the room is mapped, where the feeling of your own body is felt. The cortex is divided into 4 main regions called lobes. The frontal lobe is at the front, behind your forehead. It's involved in movement, in language, in planning, in decision-making, in attention, in personality, in the ability to control impulses and think about the future. The parietal lobe is behind the frontal lobe, near the top of the head. It processes touch, temperature, pain, body position, and the sense of where your body is in space. The occipital lobe is at the very back of the head. It processes vision. Everything you see, every color, every shape, every face, every shadow in a dim room is processed there. And the temporal lobe is on the side of the head, near the ears. It processes hearing, language comprehension, some aspects of memory, and the recognition of faces and objects. These lobes aren't sealed off from each other. They're connected by dense networks of white matter, and most complex activities involve many regions working together at once. Beneath the cortex, deep inside the brain, there are other important structures. The thalamus sits near the center, just above the brainstem, and it acts as the brain's great relay station. Almost all sensory information, except for smell, passes through the thalamus on its way to the cortex. The thalamus sorts the signals, sends them to the right destination, and helps the brain decide what deserves attention and what can be ignored. The hypothalamus sits just below the thalamus, and it's tiny, but it's enormously important. It regulates hunger, thirst, body temperature, sleep, circadian rhythms, and the activity of the pituitary gland, which is the master gland of the endocrine system. The hypothalamus is the bridge between the nervous system and the hormonal system. It takes in information about the state of the body and issues commands that keep everything in balance. It's the body's thermostat, its clock, its appetite regulator, and its sleep timer, all packed into a structure the size of an almond. The limbic system is a group of structures around the brainstem that's involved in emotion, motivation, and memory. It includes the hippocampus, which is crucial for forming new memories, and the amygdala, which is involved in fear and emotional responses. The limbic system is why experiences have emotional weight. It's why some memories feel warm and some feel sharp. It's why the smell of a particular place can carry you back to a moment from years ago. And it works closely with the cortex and the brainstem, blending feeling and thought and automatic response into a single, continuous stream of experience. The brain is not a collection of separate machines, it's a vast, densely connected network. Every region talks to many other regions. Every experience is a pattern of activity spread across millions of neurons in many different places at once. When you hear a sound, the temporal cortex processes the sound itself, but the frontal cortex helps you pay attention to it. The limbic system colors it with feeling, the parietal cortex helps you locate where it's coming from, and the brainstem keeps you awake enough to notice it. The whole brain works together, in constant, shifting patterns of activity, even when you're doing nothing at all. Especially when you're doing nothing at all. Because the brain at rest is not idle. It's still running through its routines. It's still maintaining its networks. It's still processing the day, consolidating memories, sweeping away waste, keeping the whole system tuned and ready. Sleep is not the absence of brain activity. Sleep is a different kind of brain activity, just as complex and just as organized as waking. And this is the point in the walk where we can stop for a moment and just sit with the shape of it. The brain and spinal cord, the central nervous system, are not a tangle of wires. They're not a computer made of meat. They're a living, breathing, self-organizing structure that grew itself from a single tube of cells and became the thing that lets you read these words, hear these sounds, feel this bed, remember this moment, and drift towards sleep. Every part of it is connected to every other part. Every part of it has a role, and every part of it, from the medulla keeping your breath going to the cortex dreaming behind your closed eyes, is working on your behalf right now, without asking anything from you except that you rest and let it work. In the next part, we'll step outside the central nervous system and follow the nerves as they travel out into the body. We'll talk about the peripheral nervous system, the sensory and motor pathways, and the quiet automatic system that runs the organs. But that can wait. For now, there's just the soft shape of the brain inside the skull, floating in its fluid, folded and connected and alive, and the long, gentle line of the spinal cord running down through the bones of the back, carrying the quiet traffic of the body. And you, lying somewhere in the dark, held by the very system we're describing, sinking slowly into the rest it's been working to give you all along. The central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord, never touches the outside world directly. It's sealed away inside bone, wrapped in membranes, floating in fluid. And yet it knows what's happening everywhere in the body, and it sends commands everywhere in the body, and it does all of that through the peripheral nervous system. The peripheral nervous system is everything outside the brain and spinal cord. It's the nerves that branch out through the body, the clusters of nerve cell bodies that sit along those nerves, and the sensory receptors that pick up information from the skin, the muscles, the joints, and the organs. The central nervous system is the great processing center, but the peripheral nervous system is the network that connects the center to the rest of the world. Without it, the brain would be sealed in the dark, deaf and blind and paralyzed, aware of nothing and able to do nothing. The peripheral nervous system is the body's wiring, running everywhere, carrying information in both directions at every moment. And the first thing to understand about this system is that it's not all the same. Some nerves are carrying information up to the brain, and some are carrying commands down from the brain. The nerves that carry information from the body to the central nervous system are called sensory nerves, or afferent nerves. The word afferent comes from Latin and means carrying toward. These nerves bring in the news. They carry touch, pressure, vibration, temperature, pain, the stretch of muscles, the position of joints, the fullness of the bladder, the state of the stomach, the pressure in the blood vessels, the level of oxygen in the blood. Everything the brain knows about the body and the world comes in through these sensory nerves. Some of that information becomes conscious, like the feel of the sheets against your skin. Most of it stays unconscious, like the pH of your blood or the tension in your arteries. But all of it is carried by the same kind of wiring, and all of it is being gathered every second, even when you're asleep, even when you're dreaming. The nerves that carry commands from the central nervous system out to the body are called motor nerves, or efferent nerves. Efferent means carrying away. These nerves tell the muscles to contract, tell the glands to secrete, tell the heart to speed up or slow down, tell the blood vessels to widen or narrow. They are the pathways of action. When you roll over in bed, motor nerves are firing to the muscles of your trunk and limbs. When you swallow, motor nerves are firing to the muscles of your throat. When your eyes drift closed, motor nerves are firing to the tiny muscles of your eyelids. And even when you're perfectly still, motor nerves are maintaining a low level of activity in your muscles, keeping them just slightly firm so that your body holds its shape and you don't collapse into a heap. That low, steady tone is called muscle tone, and it's the nervous system's way of keeping you ready, keeping your posture, keeping your joints aligned, even in deep rest. Most nerves in the body are mixed nerves, meaning they carry both sensory and motor fibers in the same bundle. A single spinal nerve, for example, will have some fibers carrying sensory information into the spinal cord, and some fibers carrying motor commands out to the muscles. They travel together in the same sheath, like a two-lane road with traffic going both ways. And those nerves branch and branch and branch again as they travel through the body, so that a single nerve trunk near the spine becomes a fine network of tiny fibers by the time it reaches the skin or the muscle. At the very end of the sensory fibers, there are receptors. Receptors are specialized structures that respond to particular kinds of stimulus. Some respond to touch, some respond to temperature, some respond to pain, some respond to stretch, some respond to vibration, some respond to chemicals. Some respond to light in the eye, some respond to sound in the ear. Each receptor is tuned to a particular kind of energy, and when that energy arrives, the receptor turns it into an electrical signal, and that signal travels up the sensory nerve toward the central nervous system. That's the beginning of sensation. Everything you've ever felt, from the softest breath of air on your cheek to the deep ache of a tired muscle, began as a change in a receptor somewhere in your body, turned into a signal, and carried along a nerve to the spinal cord or the brain. The peripheral nervous system also has clusters of nerve cell bodies called ganglia. A ganglion is a little swelling, a knot of cell bodies sitting outside the central nervous system. In the sensory pathways, the cell bodies of sensory neurons sit in ganglia near the spinal cord, just outside the cord itself. These ganglia are called dorsal root ganglia because they sit on the dorsal, or sensory, root of each spinal nerve. The cell body of a sensory neuron lives there, sending one long process out to the skin or muscle, where it picks up signals, and another process into the spinal cord, where it delivers the message. The motor neurons, by contrast, have their cell bodies inside the spinal cord itself, in the ventral horn, and their axons travel out through the ventral root and into the spinal nerve. So the sensory neurons have their cell bodies in the dorsal root ganglia, just outside the cord, and the motor neurons have their cell bodies in the ventral horn, just inside the cord. The two roots, dorsal and ventral, come together to form the spinal nerve, which then splits into branches that go out to the body. It's a neat, symmetrical arrangement, and it runs the whole length of the spine, from the neck to the lower back. The peripheral nervous system is usually divided into two broad functional parts. The first is the somatic nervous system. Somatic comes from the Greek word for body. The somatic nervous system is the part that deals with the outside world and with voluntary movement. It carries sensory information from the skin, the muscles, and the joints, and it carries motor commands to the skeletal muscles. When you feel the cool air on your face, that's the somatic sensory system. When you decide to turn over, that's the somatic motor system. The somatic nervous system is the part we're most aware of, because it's the part that lets us interact with the world on purpose. It's the part that lets you feel the texture of the pillowcase and move your arm to adjust it. It's the part that lets you hear a sound and turn your head toward it, or close your eyes against the light. It operates under your conscious direction, at least some of the time. The second division is the autonomic nervous system. Autonomic means self-governing. The autonomic nervous system is the part that runs the internal organs, the blood vessels, the glands, and the smooth muscle throughout the body. It controls the things you never have to think about: your heart rate, your blood pressure, your breathing in its automatic rhythm, your digestion, your sweating, your pupil size, your body temperature. The autonomic nervous system is constantly at work, monitoring the state of the body and making small adjustments to keep everything stable. It's the system that keeps you alive while you sleep. It's the system that slows your heart when you rest and speeds it up when you need to move. It's the system that widens your airways when you need more air and narrows them when you don't. It's the system that sends blood to your muscles when you're active and sends it to your gut when you're digesting. All of it automatic, all of it without a single thought from you. And the autonomic nervous system is further divided into two branches that work in balance with each other. The first is the sympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is often described as the fight or flight system because it's the part that becomes active when the body needs to respond to stress, danger, or exertion. When the sympathetic system is active, the heart beats faster, the airways open up, the pupils dilate, the blood vessels to the muscles widen, the blood vessels to the skin and gut narrow, the liver releases stored sugar for quick energy, and the whole body is prepared for action. This is the system that helped your ancestors run from predators and fight for their lives, and it's still there in you, waiting to be called on. But the sympathetic system isn't only for emergencies. It's also active at lower levels throughout the day, helping to maintain blood pressure when you stand up, keeping you alert when you need to focus, and adjusting your body to the demands of waking life. The second branch is the parasympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic system is often described as the rest and digest system because it's the part that becomes active when the body is calm, safe, and at rest. When the parasympathetic system is dominant, the heart beats more slowly, the airways relax and narrow a little, the pupils constrict, the blood vessels to the gut widen, the digestive system becomes more active, saliva production increases, and the whole body settles into a state of recovery and nourishment. This is the system that's active when you're falling asleep. This is the system that's active right now, as you lie there in the dark, breathing slowly, letting your body soften into the bed. The parasympathetic system is the quiet one. It doesn't shout, it doesn't rush. It just gently turns down the lights and lets the body restore itself. These two branches, sympathetic and parasympathetic, are always both active to some degree. They don't switch on and off like a light switch. They're more like two pedals in a car, one for acceleration and one for braking, both being used in balance to keep the car moving smoothly. During the day, the sympathetic system tends to be a little more active, keeping you alert and responsive. At night, the parasympathetic system takes over, slowing things down, lowering the heart rate, easing the breath, quieting the mind. The balance between them is regulated by the hypothalamus and the brainstem, which are constantly receiving information about the state of the body and adjusting the output of the autonomic system accordingly. It's a feedback loop. The body sends information to the brain. The brain compares the information to its set points. The brain sends commands back to the body. The body responds. The new state is reported back. And around it goes, all day, all night, keeping the internal environment stable enough for life to continue. That stability is called homeostasis, and it's one of the central goals of the whole nervous system. Not excitement, not speed, not drama, just balance, just keeping everything within its safe range so that the cells can do their work and the body can rest and repair and endure. The autonomic nervous system works through a special arrangement of two neurons in a row. The first neuron has its cell body in the brainstem or the spinal cord, and it sends an axon out to a ganglion somewhere in the body. There, it synapses with a second neuron, which sends its axon out to the target organ. In the sympathetic system, the ganglia are mostly close to the spinal cord, in two long chains that run alongside the spine. In the parasympathetic system, The ganglia are often located near or inside the target organs themselves. This difference in wiring helps explain why the two systems have different effects. The sympathetic system is arranged for widespread, coordinated activation. One signal can fan out through the chain of ganglia and activate many organs at once, which is useful when the whole body needs to respond together. The parasympathetic system is more local. Each organ has its own close-by ganglion, so the parasympathetic system can adjust one organ at a time, gently and precisely. Both systems use the same basic machinery, neurons and synapses and neurotransmitters, but they're wired differently, and that difference in wiring shapes their different roles. And all of this is happening without your attention. The heart is being told to beat. The lungs are being told to breathe. The stomach is being told to digest. The blood vessels are being told to stay the right size. The pupils are being told how much light to let in. The sweat glands are being told when to release. The liver is being told when to store sugar and when to release it. The kidneys are being told how much water to hold and how much to let go. Every organ, every gland, every little band of smooth muscle is receiving instructions from the autonomic nervous system, moment by moment, and sending back reports, moment by moment. It's the body's great quiet conversation with itself. It never stops. It never rests. And you, the conscious, waking you, are only ever aware of the tiniest slice of it. Right now, as you lie there, the conversation is continuing. Your heart is beating at a slow, steady pace, because the parasympathetic system is sending a quiet signal through the vagus nerve to the heart's pacemaker, telling it to take it easy. Your breathing is slow and even, because the brainstem is sending a steady rhythm through the phrenic nerve to the diaphragm, telling it to contract and relax, all night long. Your stomach is gently working on whatever remains of your last meal, because the parasympathetic system is sending signals to the smooth muscle in the stomach wall, encouraging it to churn slowly. Your blood vessels are in their resting state, neither too wide nor too narrow, because the autonomic system is balancing the signals that would widen them and the signals that would narrow them. Your pupils are large in the dark, letting in as much of the faint light as they can, because the parasympathetic system has released its hold on the muscles that constrict them. Your body temperature is drifting down just a little, as it does at night, because the hypothalamus has turned down the thermostat and the blood vessels in your skin are letting a little more heat escape. All of this is happening now. All of it is being managed by the peripheral nervous system, and none of it requires your help. The peripheral nervous system is often treated as the less glamorous part of the nervous system. The brain gets all the attention, with its wrinkles and its mysteries and its role in thought and identity. But the brain would be nothing without the nerves that bring it the world. The brain is like a lighthouse keeper, sitting in the dark at the top of the tower, receiving reports from every coast, sending out signals to every ship, and all of those reports and signals travel through the long, thin cables of the peripheral nervous system. The brain is the keeper, the nerves are the cables, and the body is the wide, dark sea, full of ships, full of weather, full of life, all of it connected by the quiet passage of messages through the deep. So as you settle further into rest, you can let your attention drift down, out of the skull, through the hole at the base of the skull, into the long cord of the spine, and then out along the branching nerves, into the shoulders, the arms, the hands, the chest, the belly, the hips, the legs, the feet. Every part of you is connected. Every part of you is being watched over. The sensory nerves are still reporting, even as you sink. The motor nerves are still holding you in place. The autonomic nerves are still running the quiet machinery of the body. The whole network is awake, in its own way, keeping you safe, keeping you balanced, keeping you alive. And you can let go of the need to listen. You can let the words blur. You can let the body do what it was built to do. It has been doing this all night, every night, for your whole life. It knows the way. It doesn't need you to steer. In the next part, we'll follow one of those long pathways from beginning to end. We'll start with a sensation at the skin, Follow it up through the spinal cord and into the brain, and then follow a command back down from the brain to a muscle. That's the round trip of the nervous system, the basic loop that underlies every action and every feeling. But for now, there's no need to move. There's no need to think. There's only the soft, living network of the peripheral nervous system, cradling you from the inside, carrying its quiet traffic through the dark, and asking nothing of you at all. Let's follow a single sensation from the outside world all the way into the brain, and then follow a single command from the brain all the way back out to the body. This is the basic round trip of the nervous system, the loop that underlies every movement, every feeling, every response. It's happening in you constantly, and it happens so fast that we never notice it. But when we slow it down and walk through it step by step, the beauty of the whole arrangement becomes clear. It's not a mystery, it's not magic, it's a long chain of small events, each one simple, each one connected to the next, and together they produce the seamless experience of being alive in a body. Imagine, for a moment, that the very tip of one finger comes to rest against the edge of the blanket. Not a dramatic touch, just the faint pressure of fabric against skin. That's all it takes. In the skin of that fingertip, buried just below the surface, there are tiny sensory receptors. Some of them are called mechanoreceptors, which is just a long word that means they respond to mechanical force. When the blanket presses against the skin, it bends the membrane of those receptors very slightly. That bending opens tiny channels in the receptor, and charged particles flow across the membrane, and the receptor's voltage changes. If the touch is strong enough to push the voltage past the threshold, the receptor fires an action potential. One small electrical impulse, born in the skin of the finger, right at the point where the blanket touches. That impulse doesn't just sit there, it travels. It enters the end of a sensory neuron, a neuron whose long, thin axon reaches all the way from the fingertip to the spinal cord. This neuron has its cell body tucked safely inside a dorsal root ganglion, just outside the spinal cord, but its peripheral end is in the skin, and its central end is in the spinal cord. The action potential races along the axon, from the fingertip, through the palm, through the wrist, through the forearm, through the upper arm, through the shoulder, and into the neck, where the nerve joins the spinal cord. The signal has traveled about a meter, and it's done it in a few thousandths of a second. But the journey isn't over yet. Inside the spinal cord, the sensory neuron releases a neurotransmitter at its synapse in the dorsal horn. The neurotransmitter drifts across the tiny gap and lands on the next neuron in the chain. This second neuron has its cell body in the gray matter of the spinal cord, and its axon crosses to the other side of the cord and then turns upward, joining the great bundle of white matter that runs toward the brain. So the signal, which started on one side of the body, now travels up the other side of the spinal cord. That crossing over is one of the most important features of the sensory pathway. It means that the left side of the brain receives sensation from the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain receives sensation from the left side of the body. It's a strange arrangement, but it's been true since the earliest vertebrates, and it works. The signal travels up the spinal cord, through the medulla, through the pons, through the midbrain, and into a structure called the thalamus. The thalamus sits deep in the brain, just above the brainstem, and it's the great relay station for sensory information. Almost everything that comes into the brain, except for smell, stops in the thalamus first. The thalamus doesn't just pass the signal along, it sorts it. It decides where the signal should go and how much attention it deserves. A faint touch on a finger while you're falling asleep is low priority. The thalamus lets it through, but it doesn't sound an alarm. The signal is sent to the correct part of the cerebral cortex, the part that represents that particular finger, and there, at last, the touch becomes conscious. You feel the blanket. You feel it on your finger. You feel its softness, its warmth, its slight texture. All of that experience, the whole felt quality of the touch, is the result of neurons in the cortex becoming active in a particular pattern. Now the signal has arrived. The sensation has been received. But let's say that, for whatever reason, you decide to move your hand. Just a small adjustment, just a little shift of the fingers. The decision to move begins somewhere in the frontal lobe of the brain, in a region called the motor cortex. The motor cortex is arranged like a map of the body, with different areas controlling different parts. The area that controls the hand is especially large because the hand is capable of such fine, detailed movements. When you decide to move your fingers, neurons in the hand area of the motor cortex begin to fire. They send signals down through the white matter of the brain, through the internal capsule, through the brainstem, and down into the spinal cord. The signal crosses over in the brainstem or the upper spinal cord, so that the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body, just as in the sensory pathway. In the spinal cord, the descending motor axon synapses with a motor neuron in the ventral horn. That motor neuron sends its axon out through the ventral root, into the spinal nerve, and all the way out to the muscles of the hand. At the end of the axon, the motor neuron releases a neurotransmitter onto the muscle fibers, and the muscle fibers respond by contracting. The fingers move, the hand adjusts, the blanket shifts. The whole loop, from the first touch on the skin to the movement of the hand, has taken a fraction of a second, and yet it involved sensory receptors, sensory neurons, spinal cord circuits, ascending pathways, the thalamus, the sensory cortex, the motor cortex, descending pathways, motor neurons, and muscles. It involved crossing over from one side to the other. It involved the release of chemicals at many synapses. It involved the firing of millions of neurons in coordinated patterns. And all of it happened below the surface of awareness. Quickly, silently, without effort. That's the round trip. Sensation in, perception in the brain, decision in the brain, command out, movement in the body. It's the basic loop of the nervous system, and it runs every waking moment, and it runs in modified form during sleep as well. Even when you're not moving, even when you're lying still, the sensory pathways are active. They're reporting the pressure of the bed, the temperature of the room, the position of your limbs. The brain is receiving those reports, and the motor pathways are sending quiet, low-level commands to keep your muscles just slightly firm, to keep your breathing steady, to keep your eyes closed. The loop doesn't stop when you fall asleep. It just slows down, shifts its emphasis, and continues. The body is never disconnected from the brain. The brain is never disconnected from the body. The loop is always there, always spinning, always holding you in the world. Now let's slow down even further and look at one special part of this loop, the synapse. Because the synapse is where the real subtlety of the nervous system lives. The action potential, the electrical impulse, is fast and reliable, but it's the same everywhere. A nerve impulse in a sensory neuron is not very different from a nerve impulse in a motor neuron. The electrical part of the signal is a simple all-or-nothing event. It either fires or it doesn't. There's no nuance in the action potential itself. The nuance comes at the synapse. It comes in the chemical conversation between one neuron and the next. Different neurons release different neurotransmitters. Different receiving cells respond in different ways. Some synapses push the next neuron closer to firing. Some synapses hold it back. Some synapses are strong and reliable, and some are weak and easily ignored. Some synapses change over time, getting stronger with use, getting weaker with disuse. That changing strength is thought to be one of the mechanisms of learning and memory. It's not the whole story, but it's part of it. The synapse is the place where the nervous system becomes flexible, adaptable, able to learn from experience. The synapse is also the place where many drugs and toxins act. Some substances mimic neurotransmitters and activate the receiving cell. Some substances block the receiving cell and prevent activation. Some substances interfere with the reuptake of the neurotransmitter, so it stays in the gap longer and has a bigger effect. Some substances interfere with the release of the neurotransmitter, so the signal never gets through. The reason so many drugs affect the brain and the nervous system is that the synapse is a delicate chemical conversation, and anything that changes the chemistry changes the conversation. That's why the nervous system is both so powerful and so vulnerable. It runs on a balance of chemicals, and that balance can be shifted. The body works hard to keep the balance stable, to clear away old neurotransmitters, to produce new ones, to adjust the sensitivity of the receptors, to keep the whole conversation flowing smoothly. Most of the time it succeeds. Most of the time the balance holds and the signals pass, and the body does what it needs to do. But the important point for our walk is simpler than that. The important point is that the nervous system is a system of messages. Messages travel along neurons as electrical impulses. Messages travel between neurons as chemical signals. The electrical part is fast and precise. The chemical part is slower but richer, more modulated, more capable of adjustment. And the whole system, the whole enormous network of billions of neurons and trillions of synapses, is built to move those messages from where they start to where they're needed, reliably, constantly, through the whole round trip of sensation and movement, day and night, waking and sleeping, from before you were born until the end. And the sheer scale of it is worth pausing on. The human brain contains roughly 86 billion neurons. That's not counting the glial cells, which are at least as numerous. Each of those neurons makes, on average, thousands of synaptic connections with other neurons. The total number of synapses in the brain is estimated to be in the hundreds of trillions. That's more connections than there are stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Every single one of those connections is a small living thing, a place where chemistry happens, where signals are exchanged, where the strength of the connection can shift with experience. Every memory you have, every habit, every skill, every preference, every fear, every quiet association between a smell and a place, is encoded, somehow, in the changing strengths of those synaptic connections. It's a vast, living, self-modifying network, and it's inside your head right now, and it's the same network that's letting you hear these words and slowly stop caring about them as sleep comes closer. And yet, for all its complexity, the nervous system is still built from the same simple building blocks we've been talking about all along. Cells, membranes, ions moving across membranes, chemicals released and received, electrical impulses traveling down long fibers. That's it. That's the whole thing. There's no special ingredient, no mysterious force. Just the same biology, repeated at scale, organized into layers, connected into networks, running in loops. The miracle of the nervous system is not that it's made of something different. The miracle is that it's made of the same things as everything else in the body, and yet it produces sensation and movement and thought and sleep and dreaming. It's the same clay, shaped into something that can know itself. Now, as you lie there, you can feel the loop running, not in a dramatic way, just in the small, ordinary sensations of rest, the weight of the blanket on your legs, the cool air on your face, the slow rise and fall of your chest. Each of those sensations is a message traveling up into your brain. Each of them is being received, sorted, acknowledged, and each of them is being answered, quietly, by the motor system and the autonomic system. Your chest keeps rising and falling, your muscles stay soft, your eyelids stay closed, the loop is running. It's been running all your life. It will run all night. You don't have to monitor it. You don't have to direct it. You can just lie there, on the receiving end of a body that knows what it's doing, and let the messages flow. In the next part, we'll begin to look at the senses themselves. We'll start with the skin, the largest sensory organ in the body, and talk about how touch and temperature and pain are detected and carried to the brain. We'll see how the whole surface of the body is alive with receptors, mapping the world in 1,000 tiny points of contact. But for now, there's just the one loop, the one long path from skin to brain to muscle, and the quiet pulse of messages moving along it, keeping you company in the dark, keeping you connected to the world even as you drift away from it. And that's enough. That's more than enough. That's the whole secret of the nervous system in one small round trip. The skin is the largest organ in the body, and it's also the largest sensory surface. If you spread it out flat, the skin of an adult human covers something close to 2 square meters, and every square centimeter of it is alive with nerve endings. Some of those endings are free, just the bare tips of sensory neurons, branching through the tissue like the roots of a plant. Others are wrapped in tiny specialized structures, little capsules and coils and discs that shape how the nerve ending responds to the world. Together, these receptors are the body's front line. They are the place where the outside world first touches the inside world, where pressure and warmth and cold and pain are translated into the electrical language of the nervous system. And the first thing to understand is that the skin is not a single, uniform sense organ. Different receptors respond to different things. Some are tuned to light touch, some are tuned to deep pressure, some are tuned to vibration, some are tuned to stretch, some are tuned to warmth, some are tuned to cold, some are tuned to pain, some are tuned to the slow, diffuse ache of tissue damage. Some are tuned to the fine, sharp sting of a pinprick. The skin is a patchwork of different receptor types, each one contributing a small piece of the overall picture. When you rest your hand on a blanket, you're not feeling one single thing called touch. You're feeling a whole pattern of signals from many different receptors at once. The pressure of the blanket, the temperature of the fabric, the slight texture of the weave, the gentle stretch of the skin over the knuckles. All of these are being reported simultaneously, and the brain weaves them together into the seamless experience of feeling the blanket under your hand. One of the most important receptor types in the skin is called the mechanoreceptor, and mechanoreceptors respond to mechanical force. When the skin is pressed, stretched, or vibrated, these receptors bend, and the bending opens channels in their membranes, and the channels let ions flow, and the flow of ions can trigger an action potential. There are several kinds of mechanoreceptors, each tuned to a different aspect of touch. Some are located near the surface of the skin and respond to very light touch. They have small receptive fields, meaning they respond to touch in a very small area, and they're especially dense in places like the fingertips, the lips, and the tongue. That's why those parts of the body are so sensitive. When you run your finger over a surface, the mechanoreceptors there are firing in fine detail, sending the brain a high-resolution map of every ridge and bump. Other mechanoreceptors are deeper in the skin and respond to stronger, more sustained pressure. They have larger receptive fields, so they give a coarser picture, but they tell the brain about the overall distribution of pressure across the body. Still others are tuned to vibration, and they fire best when the skin is vibrating at a particular frequency. Different receptors pick up different frequencies, so that when you hold something buzzing in your hand, the brain can tell whether it's a low rumble or a high whine. Temperature is another whole channel of sensation. Warmth and cold are detected by separate receptors, and they're not evenly distributed across the skin. Some spots on the skin are more sensitive to warmth, and some are more sensitive to cold. When the temperature of the skin changes, these receptors change their firing rate. Warmth receptors fire faster when the skin warms, and cold receptors fire faster when the skin cools. The brain reads the pattern of firing from millions of these receptors and turns it into the experience of feeling warm or cool. But temperature sensing is not just about the skin. It's also about the brain's own set point. The hypothalamus, deep in the brain, monitors the temperature of the blood and the body core, and it compares that to the set point. If the core temperature starts to drift, the hypothalamus sends signals to the blood vessels, the sweat glands, and the muscles to bring it back. The skin receptors are part of that system too, because they report the temperature of the outside world before it can affect the core. If your skin senses cold, the brain can start conserving heat before your core temperature drops. If your skin senses warmth, the brain can start releasing heat before your core temperature rises. It's a forward-looking system. The skin is the early warning station, and the brain is the controller, and together they keep your temperature within the narrow range that your cells need to survive. And then there's pain. Pain is the body's alarm system. It's not pleasant, but it's essential. Without pain, you would not know to pull your hand away from something sharp. You would not know that your ankle was sprained. You would not know that your appendix was inflamed. Pain is the signal that says something is wrong. Pay attention. The receptors that respond to pain are called nociceptors, from the Latin word for harm. Nociceptors are free nerve endings, and they respond to actual or potential tissue damage. Some nociceptors respond to intense mechanical force, like a cut or a crush. Some respond to extreme temperature, like the heat of a flame or the cold of ice. Some respond to chemicals released by damaged cells, like the soup of inflammatory signals that appears after an injury. When nociceptors fire, they send signals to the spinal cord and then up to the brain, and the brain interprets those signals as pain. But pain is not just a simple report of tissue damage. It's a complex experience, shaped by attention, emotion, memory, and context. The same injury can feel different depending on whether you're frightened or distracted, rested or exhausted. The brain doesn't just receive pain signals, it shapes them. It can turn them up or down. It can prioritize them or push them into the background. That's why pain is so variable from person to person and from moment to moment. The damage is one thing, the experience of the damage is another, and the nervous system is where both of those things meet. Now, the skin is not the only place where sensation begins. The muscles and joints have their own receptors too. These are the receptors that tell the brain about the position and movement of the body. This sense is called proprioception, and it's one of the least noticed but most important senses we have. Proprioception is how you know where your arms and legs are without looking at them. It's how you know that your left foot is slightly turned in, or that your head is tilted to one side, or that your hand is resting on your stomach. It's how you can close your eyes and touch your nose with your fingertip. It's how you can walk in the dark without falling over. The receptors for proprioception are located in the muscles, where they respond to stretch, and in the tendons, where they respond to tension, and in the joints, where they respond to the angle of the bones. They send a constant stream of information up to the brain, reporting the exact position of every joint and the length of every muscle, thousands of times per second. The brain uses this information to build a continuous, unconscious map of the body in space. That map is always there, always updating, and it's what allows you to move smoothly and confidently through the world, without having to watch every movement you make. Proprioception is also part of what makes rest possible. When you lie down and close your eyes, the brain doesn't lose track of the body. The receptors in your muscles and joints keep sending their quiet reports. Your brain knows that your legs are stretched out, that your arms are at your sides, that your head is on the pillow, that your back is against the mattress. That knowledge is part of what lets you relax. You don't have to keep checking. You don't have to keep looking. The body knows where it is, and it tells the brain, and the brain lets go of the need to supervise. That's one of the reasons lying still in the dark feels so different from lying still in bright light with your eyes open. The input is different. The balance of signals changes. The brain's picture of the body becomes quieter, more settled, more comfortable with inaction. Proprioception, the quiet sense, helps to make rest possible. And then there are the senses that reach out beyond the body. Hearing, vision, taste, smell, balance. Each of these has its own specialized receptors, located in their own specialized organs, and each of them sends its information into the brain through its own dedicated pathways. But before we visit those senses individually, it's worth noticing something they all share. Every sense, no matter how different, follows the same basic plan. A stimulus arrives from the outside world. A receptor responds to it. The receptor generates an electrical signal. The signal travels along a sensory nerve to the central nervous system. The central nervous system processes the signal and turns it into an experience. The experience is what you feel, what you see, what you hear, what you taste, what you smell. That's the chain. And it's the same chain for every sense, every time. The only thing that changes is the kind of receptor at the beginning and the part of the brain at the end. That's how the nervous system can be so versatile, It doesn't need a different system for every sense. It just needs different receptors, different pathways, and different destinations. The basic machinery is the same. And this is one of the quiet wonders of the nervous system. The brain doesn't see light, it sees patterns of electrical activity in the optic nerve. The brain doesn't hear sound, it hears patterns of electrical activity in the auditory nerve. The brain doesn't feel touch, it feels patterns of electrical activity in the sensory nerves. Everything you have ever experienced, every color and flavor and texture and sound, has been a pattern of electrical and chemical signals in your nervous system. The world is real, and the body is real, but your experience of them is a translation, it's a representation. It's the brain's best guess at what's out there, built from the signals it receives. That's not a cause for doubt, it's a cause for wonder. The brain is doing something miraculous, every second, taking raw electrical pulses and turning them into the warm, rich, textured world of ordinary experience. And it does it so smoothly, so automatically, that we never notice the translation. We just feel the world, directly and immediately, as if it were right there in front of us. Which, in a way, it is. It's there in the form of patterns in the nervous system, and those patterns are the only world we know. So as you lie there, half asleep, you can feel the senses doing their work. The pressure of the bed, the temperature of the air, the faint sounds of the room, the soft darkness behind your closed eyes. All of it is coming in through the receptors, traveling up the nerves, being sorted and woven into experience. And all of it is becoming less urgent, less sharp, as the brain shifts towards sleep. The sensory systems don't switch off when you sleep. They change their mode. They become less concerned with the outside world and more concerned with the internal state of the body. The threshold for waking is raised. Sounds that would wake you in the day are ignored. Touches that would startle you are absorbed. The body becomes a quieter, more enclosed space, and the senses turn inward. That's part of what sleep is. It's not the absence of sensation. It's a change in how the brain responds to sensation. It's a drawing in, a closing of the gates, a settling of the long conversation between the body and the brain. And the skin, the great sensory surface, is still there, still feeling. It feels the warmth of the blanket, it feels the cool of the pillow, it feels the slow, rhythmic movement of your own breathing. And it reports all of this to the brain, softly, steadily, like a watchman calling the hours. All is well, all is well, all is well. The brain hears and the brain settles, and the loop continues, and you sink a little deeper into the place where the reports don't need to be answered anymore. In the next part, we'll move from the skin to the special senses. We'll talk about the ear and how it turns sound into signals, and the eye and how it turns light into signals, and the nose and the tongue and the delicate machinery of balance. But for now, there's just the skin, the largest and oldest of the sense organs, wrapped around you like a soft, living blanket, feeling the world on your behalf, and telling the brain, in its quiet electrical language, that you are safe and warm and held. And that's enough. That's more than enough. That's exactly what the body was built to do. Hearing is the sense that never sleeps. Even in the deepest quiet, even in the darkest room, sound can reach through and touch the nervous system. A soft creak of the house, a distant car, the rustle of sheets, the slow rhythm of your own breathing. All of it enters through the ears, and all of it is carried into the brain, even when you're no longer awake enough to notice. The ear is a delicate, intricate structure built to catch waves of pressure in the air and turn them into electrical signals that the brain can understand. And the way it does that is one of the most elegant pieces of engineering in the whole body. Sound itself is movement. When something vibrates, it pushes against the air around it, and that push creates a wave of pressure that travels outward, like ripples on a pond. The ripples spread and bounce and fade, but some of them reach your ears. The outer part of the ear, the soft curved flap you can feel with your fingers, is called the pinna, and its job is to gather those ripples and funnel them into the ear canal. The pinna also helps you tell where a sound is coming from. Sound from behind sounds slightly different from sound from in front, because the shape of the pinna changes the way the sound waves bounce into the canal. Your brain learns to read those tiny differences and uses them to place sounds in space. That's why you can sometimes tell if a sound is coming from above or below, left or right, without even opening your eyes. The ear canal carries the sound waves inward until they reach the eardrum. The eardrum is a thin, flexible membrane stretched across the end of the canal, and when the sound waves hit it, it vibrates. The vibrations are tiny, sometimes as small as a fraction of the width of a single atom, but they're enough. On the other side of the eardrum is the middle ear, a small air-filled chamber, and inside that chamber are the three smallest bones in the human body. They're called the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, which mean hammer, anvil, and stirrup. The malleus is attached to the eardrum, and the stapes is attached to the entrance of the inner ear. When the eardrum vibrates, it moves the malleus, which moves the incus, which moves the stapes, and the stapes presses against a membrane called the oval window. It's a chain of movement, from the air to the eardrum to the bones to the inner ear. And the bones are shaped and arranged so that they amplify the pressure. What arrives at the inner ear is much stronger than what entered the outer ear. That's important, because the inner ear is filled with fluid, and fluid is much harder to move than air. The middle ear is the bridge between the world of air and the world of fluid, and it does its job with three tiny bones that could fit together on the tip of your finger. The inner ear is where the real work of hearing happens. It's a coiled, fluid-filled structure called the cochlea, which means snail, and that's exactly what it looks like. A spiraling tube, like the shell of a snail, filled with fluid and lined with sensory cells. When the stapes presses against the oval window, it sends a pressure wave through the fluid inside the cochlea. That wave travels through the spirals of the cochlea, moving the fluid back and forth. And running through the cochlea is a thin, flexible membrane called the basilar membrane, and sitting on top of it are the hair cells. Hair cells are the sensory receptors of the inner ear, and they get their name from the tiny, hair-like projections on their surface. When the fluid moves, it bends those projections, and when the projections bend, the hair cell fires. That firing sends a signal along the auditory nerve, and the auditory nerve carries it into the brainstem, and from there it travels up through the midbrain and the thalamus, and finally reaches the auditory cortex in the temporal lobe. The cochlea is arranged so that different parts of it respond to different frequencies of sound. High-pitched sounds make the basilar membrane vibrate near the entrance of the cochlea. Low-pitched sounds make it vibrate near the far end. It's like a long, winding keyboard, with high notes at one end and low notes at the other. When a sound enters the ear, it excites a particular pattern of movement along the basilar membrane, and that pattern tells the brain which frequencies are present. The brain then combines that information with the timing of the nerve signals and builds the experience of hearing a particular sound. A bird's song, a human voice, the hum of a fan, the soft rush of blood in your own ears. Each of those is a different pattern of frequencies and rhythms, and the ear and the brain work together to sort them out. It's a kind of real-time spectral analysis, happening continuously, with no effort on your part. And hearing never turns off. When you sleep, the auditory system is still active, the hair cells are still in place, still able to bend, the auditory nerve is still ready to fire, the brainstem is still passing signals along, the auditory cortex is still receiving them. What changes in sleep is not the ear, but the brain's response to the signals. The thalamus becomes less willing to pass sensory information through to the cortex. The cortex itself becomes less responsive. The brain starts to filter, to decide what matters and what doesn't. A familiar, soft, steady sound is ignored. A sudden, sharp, unfamiliar sound is passed through and may wake you. That's why people can sleep through the hum of a fan but wake to a baby's cry. The ear is hearing both. The brain is choosing. Now let's talk about vision, because vision is the sense that dominates waking life. A huge portion of the human brain is devoted to processing visual information, far more than any other sense. The eye is the organ that captures light, and the brain is the organ that turns light into sight. And the first thing to know is that light is also a wave, like sound, but a wave of a different kind. Light is electromagnetic radiation, and it travels through space at enormous speed. The visible light that we see is just a small slice of the whole electromagnetic spectrum, the slice our eyes happen to be sensitive to. When light enters the eye, it's focused by the cornea and the lens onto the retina at the back of the eye, and there it's absorbed by photoreceptor cells. That's where the conversion happens. Light becomes electricity. The retina contains two main types of photoreceptors, called rods and cones. Rods are for dim light. They're extremely sensitive, able to respond to a single photon of light, but they don't distinguish colors. That's why everything looks gray in the dark. Cones are for bright light and color. They're less sensitive than rods, but they come in 3 varieties, each tuned to a different range of wavelengths, roughly corresponding to red, green, and blue. By comparing the output of the 3 kinds of cones, the brain is able to construct the experience of color. The center of the retina, a small area called the fovea, is packed with cones and gives you the sharpest, most detailed vision. That's where your eyes point when you look directly at something. The rest of the retina has more rods and gives you broader, less detailed coverage, which is why your peripheral vision is good at detecting motion but poor at reading small print. The photoreceptors in the retina are not nerve cells themselves. They're specialized sensory cells, but they connect to neurons within the retina, and those neurons connect to more neurons, and eventually the signals leave the eye through the optic nerve. The optic nerve is a bundle of more than 1 million axons, all carrying visual information from the eye to the brain. The 2 optic nerves meet at a structure called the optic chiasm, where some of the fibers cross to the other side. Just as with touch and movement, the left side of the brain processes the right side of the visual world, and the right side of the brain processes the left side of the visual world. After the chiasm, the signals travel through the thalamus and then fan out into the visual cortex at the very back of the brain. There, the brain begins to reconstruct the image, line by line, edge by edge, color by color, motion by motion. From there, the information is sent forward to other areas that recognize shapes, faces, places, and objects. The visual system is a huge distributed network, and it's running every moment your eyes are open. When you close your eyes at night, the visual system doesn't go silent. The photoreceptors are no longer stimulated by light, but the neurons in the retina and the visual cortex still show spontaneous activity. That's part of why you see faint shapes and colors in the dark, the soft phosphenes and dim blobs that drift across your vision when your eyes are closed. The visual system is always generating some level of activity, even with no input, and the brain is always interpreting that activity. In the dark, with no structured input, the interpretations become dreamlike and vague. That's a gentle reminder that the brain is not just a receiver, it's a generator. It makes patterns. It fills in gaps, it constructs the world as much as it perceives it. And when you close your eyes and let the darkness settle, you're not shutting off vision, you're just changing the input. The screen is still on, the projector is still running, it's just playing faint, formless shapes instead of the bright world. Balance is another sense that lives in the inner ear, right next to the cochlea. The part of the inner ear that handles balance is called the vestibular system, and it's made of a set of fluid-filled chambers and canals. The vestibular system detects the position and movement of the head. There are 3 semicircular canals, arranged at right angles to each other, like the 3 axes of a 3-dimensional space. They detect rotation. When you turn your head, the fluid inside the canals lags behind slightly, bending little sensory hair cells, and that tells the brain which way the head is turning. There are also 2 otolith organs, the utricle and the saccule, which detect linear acceleration and the pull of gravity. They contain tiny crystals of calcium carbonate, called otoliths, sitting on top of a layer of hair cells. When you tilt your head or move forward or upward, The crystals shift, bending the hair cells, and the brain reads the direction of the shift. All of this information is sent along the vestibular nerve to the brainstem and the cerebellum, and it's combined with information from the eyes, the muscles, and the joints. That's how you keep your balance. That's how you know you're lying down. That's how you know which way is up, even in total darkness. The vestibular system is always working. Right now, as you lie there, it's telling the brain that you're horizontal, that your head is still, that there's no rotation, no acceleration. The brain is using that information to keep your eyes still, to keep your head comfortable on the pillow, to keep the small muscles of your neck and back in the right state. It's the quiet companion of rest. It never stops, and it never tires, and it asks nothing of you. Taste and smell are the chemical senses. They respond to molecules in the environment. Taste buds on the tongue detect dissolved substances in food and drink. Each taste bud contains receptor cells that respond to one of a small number of basic qualities: sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami, which is a savory taste found in things like broth and cheese and tomatoes. The receptors for taste are clustered on the tongue, but they're also present in smaller numbers on the roof of the mouth and in the throat. When a food molecule binds to a taste receptor, it triggers an action potential, and the signal travels through the facial nerve and the glossopharyngeal nerve to the brainstem, and then to the thalamus, and then to the taste cortex. Taste is a relatively simple sense, with only a few basic qualities, but it's combined with smell to produce the rich, complex experience of flavor. Smell is handled by receptors in the roof of the nasal cavity. These receptors are actual neurons, and they extend tiny projections into the mucus layer. When odor molecules in the air dissolve into the mucus and bind to the projections, the neurons fire. What makes smell unusual is that the signals don't pass through the thalamus on the way to the cortex, unlike almost every other sense. They go directly to the olfactory bulb, which sits just above the nose, and then to the olfactory cortex and the limbic system. That's why smell is so strongly connected to emotion and memory. A particular scent can bring back a whole moment from childhood, vivid and sudden, with all its feeling attached. Smell is the most ancient of the senses, and its direct line to the emotional brain is a reminder of how old the sense of smell is. Before there were thoughts, before there were words, there was smell, and it went straight to the deepest parts of the brain. All of these senses, hearing, vision, balance, taste, smell, and the skin senses, are gathered together in the brain and woven into a single, unified experience. You don't experience the world as separate channels of sound and sight and touch. You experience it as one continuous, integrated moment. The brain is the great integrator. It takes the streams of sensory information and merges them into a single picture of the world and your place in it. That integration is happening right now, even as you drift. The sound of your own breathing, the feel of the bed beneath you, the faint taste of the night air, the dark behind your eyelids, the slow sense of your own body, horizontal and still. All of it is being woven together, not into a bright, alert awareness, but into a soft, dim, comfortable sense of being here, being safe, being at rest. And that, in the end, is what the senses are for. Not just to inform, not just to warn, but to hold you in the world, gently, even as you let go of it. In the next part, we'll move from the senses to the movement. We'll talk about how the brain plans and carries out movement, how the muscles are controlled, and how the whole motor system works together to make smooth, coordinated action. But for now, there's just the quiet concert of the senses, playing softly in the dark. The ears are listening, the skin is feeling, the inner ear is balancing, the eyes are closed, the nose is breathing, the mouth is still, and the brain, the great integrator, is receiving it all and letting it all go. Movement is the body's answer to the world. It's how we reach for things, how we turn away from things, how we make our way through rooms and streets and whole lives. And it begins, as so much does, in the brain. Not in the muscles, not in the bones, but in the quiet, folded tissue of the cerebral cortex, where an intention forms. And that intention, before it becomes a movement, is just a pattern of activity, a few thousand neurons in the motor cortex firing in a particular arrangement. Nothing has moved yet, no muscle has shortened, but the decision is being made, the plan is being drawn, and the plan will travel down through the brain, down through the spinal cord, out through the nerves, and into the muscles, where it will become action. The motor cortex is a strip of gray matter running across the back of the frontal lobe, just in front of a deep groove called the central sulcus. It's arranged like a map of the body, but not an equal map. Some parts of the body get much more space than others. The hands, the face, the tongue, the lips. These are the parts capable of the finest, most detailed movements, and so they have the largest representation in the motor cortex. The trunk and the legs have smaller areas, because their movements are larger and less precise. If you were to draw a picture of the body according to the amount of motor cortex devoted to each part, it would look like a strange little creature with enormous hands and a huge face and a small, thin body. That map is called the motor homunculus, and it's a reminder that the brain cares about precision. It devotes its resources to the parts that need the most control. Just behind the motor cortex, on the other side of the central sulcus, is the somatosensory cortex. That's where the body's sensations are received. It's also arranged as a map of the body, with the same unequal proportions. The lips, the tongue, the hands, the face, these are the areas with the most sensory receptors, and so they have the largest representation in the somatosensory cortex. The two maps face each other across the central sulcus, the sensory map and the motor map, the receiving side and the sending side. That's a lovely symmetry. The brain keeps the sense of the body and the movement of the body right next to each other, like two halves of a single conversation. When a movement is planned, the motor cortex doesn't work alone, it's part of a network. Other areas of the cortex are involved in deciding what to do and how to do it. The prefrontal cortex, at the very front of the brain, is involved in goals and intentions and the weighing of options. The premotor cortex, just in front of the motor cortex, is involved in planning the sequence of movements. The parietal lobe helps integrate sensory information about the body and the environment. The basal ganglia, which are clusters of neurons deep inside the brain, help select which movements to make and which to suppress. The cerebellum, as we've already seen, smooths and fine-tunes the movement as it unfolds. All of these areas are active, to varying degrees, whenever you move. Even a simple movement, like turning your hand over under the covers, involves a whole network of regions, working together in a coordinated pattern. Once the plan is ready, the signal travels from the motor cortex down through the brain. It passes through the internal capsule, a dense bundle of white matter that carries fibers from the cortex down to the brainstem and spinal cord. In the brainstem, many of the fibers cross to the other side, so the left motor cortex controls the right side of the body, and the right motor cortex controls the left side. The fibers continue down into the spinal cord, in a tract called the corticospinal tract. The corticospinal tract is one of the most important pathways for voluntary movement. It's the direct line from the brain to the spinal cord, carrying the commands that make things happen. Other pathways, from the brainstem, also carry movement commands, but the corticospinal tract is the one that carries the most detailed, precise control, especially for the hands and fingers. In the spinal cord, the descending fibers synapse with motor neurons in the ventral horn. Those motor neurons are the final common path. They're the last neurons in the chain before the muscle. Their cell bodies sit in the spinal cord, and their axons travel out through the ventral roots, into the spinal nerves, and then out to the muscles. Each motor neuron innervates a group of muscle fibers. When the motor neuron fires, all the muscle fibers it connects to contract together. That group is called a motor unit. A single muscle is made of many motor units, and the brain can choose to activate just a few or many, depending on how much force is needed. For a small, precise movement, just a few motor units fire. For a large, strong movement, many motor units fire, and they fire faster. The muscle contracts more strongly, and the movement happens. But the muscle isn't just a passive cable, it's a living tissue, and the way it contracts is worth understanding. A muscle fiber is a long, thin cell, packed with proteins that can slide past each other. The two main proteins are called actin and myosin. When a muscle fiber receives a signal from a motor neuron, the neurotransmitter acetylcholine is released at the junction between the nerve and the muscle. That junction is called the neuromuscular junction, and it's a synapse, just like the synapses between neurons. The acetylcholine binds to receptors on the muscle fiber, and that triggers an electrical signal in the muscle cell. The electrical signal spreads through the muscle fiber and causes calcium to be released from storage inside the cell. The calcium allows the actin and myosin to interact. The myosin heads attach to the actin filaments, pull, release, and reattach, and the filaments slide past each other. That sliding is what shortens the muscle. Multiply that by millions of actin and myosin molecules across millions of muscle fibers, and you have the force that lifts a hand, or a leg, or a whole body. But movement is not just about contraction, it's about balance. For every muscle that contracts, there's another muscle that relaxes. Muscles are arranged in pairs, called agonists and antagonists. The biceps and triceps in the upper arm are a classic example. When the biceps contracts, it bends the elbow. At the same time, the triceps must relax, or it would resist the movement. When the triceps contracts, it straightens the elbow, and the biceps must relax. The nervous system manages this automatically. It sends signals to the contracting muscle, and at the same time, sends signals to the opposing muscle to let go. That coordination is called reciprocal inhibition, and it's built into the circuitry of the spinal cord and the brain. Without it, movement would be jerky and impossible. With it, movement is smooth and fluid, and all of that coordination is happening below the level of consciousness. You don't have to think about relaxing your triceps when you bend your arm. The nervous system does it for you, in the same instant, as part of the plan. And then there's posture. Movement doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in a body that has weight, in a world that has gravity. Every time you move, the body has to adjust its posture to keep you balanced. If you lift your arm, the muscles of your trunk tighten slightly to keep you from tilting over. If you roll over in bed, the muscles of your shoulders and hips coordinate to turn you without twisting your spine. These postural adjustments are handled by the brainstem, the cerebellum, and the spinal cord, working together with the sensory systems. They're automatic, and they happen before the main movement even begins. The brain anticipates the shift in balance and prepares the body for it. That's why you can reach for a glass of water without falling out of your chair, and why you can turn over in bed without waking yourself up. The body knows what's about to happen, and it prepares, and the movement happens smoothly, and you barely notice. But the most remarkable thing about the motor system is how much it can do without any conscious input at all. Most of the movements you make in a day are not planned. They're automatic. They're habits, routines, postures, adjustments, small corrections, all handled by the lower levels of the motor system. When you walk, you don't think about the exact sequence of muscle contractions in each leg. You just walk. The spinal cord, the brainstem, and the cerebellum handle the details. When you breathe, you don't think about the diaphragm. It just moves, in and out, all day and all night. When you swallow, when you blink, when you shift your weight from one hip to the other, these movements happen on their own. The brain is involved, but it's the lower brain, the automatic brain, not the conscious, deliberating you. That's why you can carry on a conversation while you walk, or think about nothing while you lie still. The body is running itself. The motor system is doing its work in the background, like a competent staff that knows its tasks and doesn't need to be told. And at night, when you lie down to sleep, the motor system changes its mode again. The voluntary muscles relax. The postural muscles let go. The body becomes heavy and still. The brainstem sends signals down to the spinal cord that inhibit the motor neurons, making it harder to move. That's called sleep paralysis in its normal, healthy form, and it's what keeps you from acting out your dreams. You don't notice it because you're not trying to move. But it's there, a gentle restraint, holding the body still while the mind goes where it needs to go. And yet, even in sleep, there are movements. The chest rises and falls. The eyes dart under the lids during certain phases. The body shifts position now and then. The motor system is never completely silent. It's just running at a lower level, a slower rhythm, keeping the body comfortable and safe while consciousness recedes. The motor system is also deeply connected to the sensory system. You can't move well without feedback. Every movement sends sensory information back to the brain. The muscles report their length. The joints report their angle. The skin reports the pressure of contact. The inner ear reports the movement of the head. The eyes report the movement of the world across the retina. All of this feedback is used to correct and refine the movement as it happens. It's a continuous loop. Command, movement, feedback, correction, command again. The brain is not just sending orders. It's listening constantly to how the body is responding. That's why movement is so adaptable. You can walk on uneven ground, pick up a fragile object without breaking it, touch your nose with your eyes closed. The motor system is not a one-way street. It's a conversation, and the conversation is fast and fluid and mostly silent. There's a kind of quiet pleasure in this, if you think about it too long. The body is not a machine that carries the brain around. It's not a vehicle that obeys the mind. It's a partner. The brain and the body have been in conversation since before you were born, and they've learned each other perfectly. They've learned how to move together, how to rest together, how to breathe together. When you lie down and let the day go, the body doesn't need instructions. It knows what to do. The motor system knows how to let go. The muscles know how to soften. The breath knows how to slow. The whole vast network of movement and sensation knows how to settle into stillness, and it does, night after night, without any help from you. That's the gift the motor system gives you at the end of every day. Not just the ability to move, but the ability to stop moving, to be still, to rest. In the final part of this long walk, we'll begin to talk about the brain as the seat of the mind. We'll talk about sleep itself, about the cycles of the sleeping brain, about memory and dreaming, and the quiet work that happens while you're not awake. But for now, there's just the body, lying still, held in the balance between movement and rest. The motor cortex is quiet. The motor neurons are firing only in the slow, steady patterns that keep the chest rising and the eyelids closed. The muscles are soft. The joints are relaxed. The feedback loop is running low and slow, reporting nothing urgent, just the quiet fact of a body at rest. And you, if you're still awake enough to notice, can feel it. The heaviness, the stillness, the slow, soft letting go. That's the motor system, doing its oldest and most essential work, not moving, just being, just holding you here, safe and still, while the night goes on. We have been walking for a long while now, through the layers of the body, from the smallest cells to the tissues, from the tissues to the organs, from the organs to the systems, and then deep into the nervous system itself. We've followed messages up from the skin and down to the muscles. We've visited the senses and the motor pathways, and the quiet automatic systems that run the heart and the lungs and the stomach. And now, at the end of the walk, we come to the thing that has been listening all along, the brain. Not just as an organ, not just as a bundle of neurons, but as the seat of the mind, the thing that is aware, the thing that is, in some way, you. And the first thing to say about the brain as the seat of the mind is that we don't fully understand it. We understand a great deal about neurons and synapses and action potentials and sensory pathways. We can map the cortex, trace the white matter, measure the electrical fields, watch the blood flow change as different areas become active. But the step from all of that physical activity to the experience of being aware, of feeling, of thinking, of being a self, that step is still not fully explained. We know that the brain produces the mind. We know that changes to the brain change the mind. We know that when the brain is damaged, the mind is damaged. But how a particular pattern of firing neurons becomes the taste of honey, or the feeling of sadness, or the memory of a summer afternoon, that is still one of the deepest questions there is. And for our purposes, for this soft walk through the body, it's enough to sit with that mystery, not to solve it, not to push at it, just to notice it. The thing behind your eyes, the thing that has been following these words, is made of cells and chemicals and electrical signals, and it is also aware, and it is also you. Both things are true at once. And the brain, this aware thing, spends a third of its life asleep. Sleep is not a pause, it's not a blank. It's a state the brain enters deliberately, carefully, and it's a state the brain needs. If you go without sleep for long enough, the brain begins to fail. Attention blurs, memory breaks down, mood shifts, judgment slips. The brain needs sleep the way the body needs food and water and air. And sleep is not a single uniform state. It's a cycle, a rhythm, a series of stages that the brain moves through over and over again through the night. Each stage has its own pattern of activity, its own chemical signature, its own purpose, and the brain moves through them without your help, guided by its own internal clocks, in a slow, regular rhythm that has been running since you were born. The sleep cycle lasts roughly 90 minutes, and it repeats 4 or 5 or 6 times in a night. The first stage of sleep is light. It's the transition between waking and sleeping, the moment when the world begins to soften and the body begins to let go. The brain's electrical activity slows, the muscles relax, the eyes begin to drift. You may still be aware of sounds around you, but they start to lose their edges. This is the doorway. Most people pass through it without noticing. Then comes the second stage, which is deeper than the first. The brain's activity slows further, but it's punctuated by brief bursts of faster activity called sleep spindles and K-complexes. These bursts may be involved in memory processing, in protecting sleep from disturbance, in helping the brain integrate what happened during the day. The body temperature drops a little, the heart rate slows. This is where most of the night is spent. Then comes the third stage, which is deep sleep. The slowest, deepest, most restorative stage. The brain produces large, slow waves. The body is very still. It's hard to wake from this stage, and if you are woken, you feel groggy and confused. This is the stage when the body repairs itself, when growth hormone is released, when the immune system is strengthened, when the tissues are maintained and restored. This is the body's deep maintenance mode, and the brain is the one running it. And then, after deep sleep, the brain rises back up through the stages and enters a very different state. This is rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep. In REM sleep, the brain becomes highly active. The electrical activity looks almost like waking. The eyes move rapidly under the closed lids. And the heart rate and breathing become irregular. The body, however, is largely paralyzed, held still by the brainstem's inhibition of the motor neurons. That's a mercy, because this is the stage when most vivid dreaming happens. If the paralysis weren't there, you might act out your dreams. Instead, you lie still, while the brain generates entire worlds behind your closed eyes. REM sleep is when the brain processes emotion, consolidates learning, and perhaps rehearses skills. It's when the brain sorts through the day, making connections, trimming some, strengthening others. The exact content of dreams is still mysterious, and there are many theories about why we dream. Some say dreams are the brain's attempt to make sense of random activity. Some say they're simulations, practice for real life. Some say they're the byproducts of memory processing. Some say they're the mind's way of working through feelings it couldn't face in the day. The truth is probably some of all of these, and more. But for our purposes, it's enough to know that dreams are part of the brain's nightly work. They're not interruptions of sleep. They're one of the reasons sleep exists. and then the cycle repeats. Light sleep, deeper sleep, deep sleep, REM, and back again. The proportions change across the night. Early in the night, deep sleep dominates. Later in the night, REM sleep dominates. That's why the dreams just before waking are often the longest and most vivid. The brain has spent the whole night moving through its cycles, and by morning it has done an enormous amount of quiet work. Memories have been consolidated, emotions have been processed. The body has been repaired, the immune system has been refreshed, the connections between neurons have been adjusted, strengthened here, weakened there, so that when you wake, the brain is not quite the same brain that went to sleep. It has been changed by the night. It has been rebuilt. Sleep is not rest in the sense of nothing happening. Sleep is work, but it's the kind of work that happens in the dark, without your awareness, without your effort, and it leaves you feeling rested, because it's the work the brain was built to do. And here's the beautiful symmetry. The nervous system we've been walking through, the system that senses the world and moves the body and runs the organs and carries the messages, is the same system that sleeps. The brain that built this walk is the brain that will soon, if it hasn't already, let go of the walk. The neurons that have been carrying these words from your ears to your cortex are the same neurons that will soon shift into sleep mode. The neurotransmitters that have been keeping you just awake enough to follow along are the same chemicals that will soon change their balance, and the sleep systems will take over, and the waking systems will recede. It's all one continuous system. Waking and sleeping, sensing and moving, feeling and thinking, all of it is the same nervous system, the same living network, moving through its rhythms, doing its work, keeping you alive and aware and able to rest and wake and rest again. And that's the thing to hold on to as the words begin to fade. You don't have to hold on to it. You don't have to remember it. The body and the brain will do what they need to do, whether you remember or not. The layers of the body, cell and tissue and organ and system will keep working. The nervous system, that vast and ancient network, will keep its quiet watch. The ears will keep listening. The skin will keep feeling. The breath will keep rising and falling. The sleep cycles will come and go, like tides, all through the night, and you will rest. Not because you've earned it, though you have. Not because you've completed anything, though you have, but because rest is what the body and the brain are built for. It's part of the rhythm. It's part of the design. It's the other half of being alive. And if you'd like to keep any of this for the daytime, the No Fluff Anatomy and Physiology Guide is there, at the link in the description, for when you're awake and curious. It covers the same ground in a form you can read and revisit. And there's also the No Fluff Academy, for anyone who wants the same subjects taught properly while awake. But those are daytime things. They can wait. Tonight, there's nothing to do. There's nowhere to be. There's no test, no deadline, no need to follow along. There's only the soft dark, and the sound of a voice, and the slow, steady work of a body and a brain settling into rest. So let the words go now. Let them drift further away. You don't need them anymore. The walk is over, and the place you've arrived at is quiet. Your breathing is slow. Your body is heavy. Your mind, if it's still awake, is soft at the edges. The brain is already beginning its shift. The sleep systems are stirring. The waking systems are loosening their hold. There's nothing more to learn tonight. There's nothing more to do. There's only this, the dark, the quiet, the slow, gentle pulse of a body at rest, and the vast, patient network of the nervous system, carrying you down into sleep.